recording for everyone is gonna watch later. We're on the 19th of February 2026. I'm Andrea Isoni, Chief AI Officer at AI Technologies. All I'm gonna do today is giving you a overview, video form, long form of the state of AI. All I'm gonna say is gonna be based on the report that we just published in February, 2nd of February 2026, a few weeks ago. And yeah, I guess we can start. So, as you probably some of you know anyway, this report is not our first rodeo. In fact, it's the fifth time we are publishing that. We started in 2022. This is the fifth edition of the report. And basically, we analyze what happened between January last year, 25, until January 26, and we give, based on that, what we think is going to happen in the roughly next year. All right. Just to have a brief overview of me, or people that don't know me, I am involved in AI for more than 10 years now, since I finished my PhD in 2014. And then from there, I basically, all I did is work in AI. Yes, I wrote a book in machine learning in 2016 actually. Times fly actually. It's been translated in few languages: English, Chinese, and Korean. More than 10,000 copies, as far as I know, in the three languages. Committee member of ISO for certification, you may know, it's called 42001, and IEEE certification body. I spot AI in many different countries, and in fact, I'm gonna speak in few countries this year too. Stay tuned for that. If some of you possibly are gonna meet in person in one of the next event. Now, just a brief overview. As I say, it's 5 years that we published this report. As you can see from this slide, quite a few respectable and established agency, government, you name it, and university and companies are reading the report. Whoever of you is just reading now, that you're not the only one that read this report. Most of this, by the way, is repeated over the years. Basically, they download the report and read the report every year. That said, this is important. I think for this year, I decided to add this. First of all, whatever I'm gonna say or whatever is written in the report is not financial advice. Okay, it's information and education only, not needed to be taken as financial or legal or tax advice for the matter. For that, you need to engage with a specialist. That say, for sure, it may give you ideas, possibly actionable, how to trade in the market or position yourself. In fact, the report is designed for an audience of executive in various different industry. They need to know, for example, if they need to spend or allocate a budget for AI, as in processes. We talk about that in during the report, or even R&D, research and development, or even investing if you want to buy a company or invest in a startup, whatever that is. The report is designed to give you an idea, first of all, what the leading edge of AI research is, what are the implications in the industry, the current rate of adoption, and if there are industries that are supposed to shoot up in the next 1 or 2 years. I'm going to do a spoiler: robotics will be, and give you the reason why. Now, move on. This is just not on the report or familiar name. I may touch on that. You may read it yourself. What I think is very important, though, is giving you an idea of how we structure the report. I know most of you possibly care about the data or the prediction we are gonna say or I'm gonna say today, but for me, one of the most important things is not the prediction per se, but the structure in the framework I'm using to come up with this prediction. Okay, this slide is supposed to give you an overview of that. Basically, what I think is important is to give a first of overview what I call the secular trend, things that are impacting everyday life. They are impacting life, consumer and market and industries for more than 10 years. Give an example: aging. Yeah, aging is a secular catalyst. Population around the world is getting older and older, and this is like what is called secular catalyst. There is a list of that. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Combined with that is what I call catalyst trends. Catalyst trends mean trends that are into effect in uh, for 5 years or less. I give an example: AI regulation. Yeah, AI regulation has been, well, for example, the UAI Act has taken into effect since August 2024, so less than 5 years, and definitely this is an implication on adoption, industrial consumer, and so forth, so on. So this is a catalyst trend. Then what you call the contingent event. It can be an accident, like a cybersecurity accident. It can be an election of a president, things like that, or immediate surge, or a scarcity of certain material, memory, for example, these days. Whatever that is, the combination these three things give what we think is a trend prediction. Now, not sure if I can be a little bit more precise on that. Let me see if, because I'm gonna spend few more minutes on this if I can. Sharing a source. Never mind, it's not possible to do that. But the reason why I spend already a few minutes on this slide before getting to the meat of this report is because I truly think this kind of framework allows you to understand what is out of the mind when someone say things like, give an example, in the near future we are going to face the robots, and robots will destroy us, and will be succumbing to some robot that dominate the world, the Skynet kind of nightmare scenario or fiction, something like that. Well, I don't believe it's going to happen. The reason is there is a secular trend that completely contradict this. Just to go on the relevant page, secular trend number one is human machine hybridization, which basically means if you have an overview of more than 30 years, in fact, this slide starting to in the year 2000, more than 20 years ago, you will see that first we invented a smartphone, so something that we constantly work, be entertained by, things like that, right? And then in 2010 we have the smartwatch. 2015ish we have the smart home devices, the Alexa or the alike, right? Then we are now starting to have goggles or smart glasses, things like that. To the very point, if you've seen this year, even Nike released a AI enabled shoe in which you can be a little bit more efficient in your walking or running with an enhanced shoes. If you look at that, I believe they call it Nike Amplify. To the very end, do you see this is a trend, right? So we first start from a mobile device. I suppose everyone here can agree that nobody can live without a mobile device. Then we have smartwatch, something that touch your screen. So first is external, then constantly touching your skin, and then to the very end, you're gonna have wearables, which started to come into the market, like Nike Amplify, to the very end of what is called brain-computer interface. Yeah, the neural link. So basically, a heart or invasive device literally attached to your brain that directly communicate or are again hybridized with the machine. So if you believe in this trend, you cannot believe at some point we'll have a Skynet scenario in which the robots, the super intelligent AI, whatever that is going to dominate us for the simple reason we are going to be merged with AI directly. So in a merging situation, this cannot happen. Therefore, that's why I still think it's important to at least give, if you like, a set of assumption in which from which you can determine if a scenario is realistic or not. Given if I believe, for this example, that the secular trend of hybridization, I do not believe in a scanet scenario. That's the reason. Yeah, and there are others. This is the kind of the reasoning. I said I'm gonna touch point to that depending on the prediction I'm gonna touch today. That said, let's move on. Now let me check the live in case there is someone that asked something in the live. No, okay. Let's move on that. This is a brief overview of the catalyst trend, which are still relevant today. As usual, every year we add some few catalyst trend in addition to the one you already have. At least we haven't seen or observed any precedent catalyst trend is not effective into effect anymore, at least so far. But there will be a day, I'm sure, in the future, in which some catalyst trend has exhausted their effect into the market, society, things like that. So first is obviously governance, AI governance still active. The second is data generation. Again, there is a trend, but this is actually a little bit evolving. If you remember, for years and years, there was a trend of data is the oil, things like that. That's been overcome, I would say, a few years ago, when, first of all the data possible and available has been already consumed by the AI and trained. The AI has already been trained by that, so there is no new bulk of data that any new AI can tap into, because it's already basically all consumed, apart very niche data set. I'll come to that later. But there is a new trend. There was actually 2-3 years ago starting a new trend of synthetic data. Even that is extensively used to the point that now what is happening is, from human generated, then we have synthetic, now we have a hybrid data set, which basically means data sets that are curated in a way that is first is synthetic, then the human probably revised. The easiest way is to understand that if you generate an image with the tool you like, the GenAI tool you like, that image is definitely synthetic, but then you retouch it. Yeah, you add or cancel whatever you want on the image, etc. Now, the image is not anymore purely synthetic because there is a human intervention to it. So that's why we call it hybrid data. Yeah, and that's the actual current trend. Yeah, from again from human to synthetic to hybrid data. Then cloud data center. Well, I'm sure you know many people talk about data centers now. There are evolution on that. It's definitely happening. There more and more data center growth is in the center of the play today. But there are new unexpected, how would I say, twist, like data center in space, for example. I'm going to touch about that. And obviously there is a sovereign trend that also happened, that basically every state, for security or for mainly for security really purposes, they actually need to have their own data center within their own border rather than relying on data center outside their borders. Energy supply consumption, not spending too much time on this. Yes, AI does consume a lot of energy, but probably what you read in the media is a little bit misquoted. Let's put it that way. There are definitely energy supply imbalances, but need to be contextualized, which, if I have enough time, I'll probably at least touch on that. The crypto AI ecosystem is something that at the moment is still happening, but is probably getting into a winter. But there are still very, very interesting blockchain projects that combine with AI, as it happened today. Supply chain localization, again, due to political instabilities and world polarization, the workforce and the supply chain and the outsourcing workforce that possibly many countries used to have, for because it was cheaper to adopt that, is getting a bit disrupted, as in the outsourced workforce is still outsourced outside of the richest countries, but closer to the border. So you will see countries like US relying more on close border with Mexico or near Americas rather than far away like Philippines or things like that. This is kind of a migration, close border outsourcing. VC investment in tech, again, I'm going to talk about that a lot, but basically the majority of funding today, funding in VC space, in venture capital, is is mostly AI related. I'm going to talk about that. Labor shortages, no matter what many people say about AI, there is displacing job or things like that, which is not displacing, but it's mismatching skill set. There's another story. I may talk about that. But the first point to mention about that, there are actually still shortages, yeah, in specific fields. It's not true that AI is just creating, regardless of AI, actually, regardless of AI, the job market is not in a redundancy, in overall redundancy mode in general, let alone for AI. Again, this is another catalyst trend is the debt ratios. So GDP to debt ratios. Debt is rising basically all around the world. At best, it's staying stable. And this is a catalyst trend we all need to live with, which obviously impact AI investment, AI adoption, cost of living, things like that. Virtualization of living. I would say this is started possibly before COVID, so definitely more than 5 years, but definitely it's been accelerated by COVID, and it's a 5-year trend, and so we call catalyst trend. There is an effect into place like working from home or the new generation preferring to socialize online rather than in a physical space, like traditionally it's been a pub or a bar or things like that. This is as implication. A quick example now: video game professional player is basically paid like a football, an actual physical player that play, let's say, football. The salary range for a video game player and a footballer are in the same range. That is a consequence of this catalyst trend, as in what we call visualization of living. Now, quickly on the prediction last year. If more interested, I can either answer questions or give you a more detailed explanation on the report, especially last year report. So last year prediction were about 27 prediction. Of that, I would say quite a few number, definitely more than, I don't remember the number, but definitely more than 50 or possibly 60% were right. Some of them were unknown, as you can see from the question marks, and few of them, in fact, I can tell you how many are bluntly wrong. 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 27 prediction were bluntly wrong. So what we got here, so basically we started on predicting what will be the race of performance in LLM or text model, right? So this is the pinnacle of sophistication in artificial intelligence, the text related models. There is a reason, well, some of you may realize that there is more competitiveness in LLM there is for image or video generation. There is a reason for that. If you're interested, I'll tell you that, but it's not specific. I talk why there is this difference, but there is a difference. It's a major one. But anyway, the pinnacle of AI undoubtedly is related to a textual model or understanding text and producing text or things like that, or multimodal. We say that last year prediction was the best overall model will be from a big tap of love with more 40% synthetic data, non-transformer architecture. For those of you who have been technical enough, since the starting of this LLM era, the transformer architecture is the dominant architecture, but we start to see crack. In fact, we started to see cracks in research and development from the last year on non-transformer architecture. There was one that wasn't transformer architecture in the top 10 this year, with more than 5 million costing training, and score at most 15% better than smaller models. When I say smaller model, actually what I intended to say was open source, but hey, that's the way that I said. And also I added within 6 models should be replicated by open source model. Now, I would say this is done. If you look at GPT-3 and 3.5, it's still dominant by big tech. There is no open source pure lab that can, dominate from them. Many chip models are within the 15% range, and this is speculative, but very, very clear. If you look a lot of research, they use definitely more than 40% synthetic data, and there is only one reason for that: they ran out real data to use. That's the reality of it. Although the best are still very much transformer based, there are many in the top 10 that now use what is called, we started to say last year, mixture of architecture. The term used today is hybrid models, which is what I call last year mixture of architecture. It's a different name for the same thing, which is basically means the architecture of the latest and the most sophisticated and performant LLMs are not only transformer based, but there is I call it mixture architecture, but they call it hybrid model, which basically means the other competitive architecture is diffusion. So it's a mixture of attention and diffusion layer. Let's put it that way for now, but more details in a separate conversation if someone is interested. Top performing model post-trained, but I may need to remind you, the audience, that now what we call training the model is a bit of a generic term, because at least there are 3 phases of training now. What is called pre-training, and then there is post-training, and then if you want, there is something like fine-tuning, mid-training and post-training, mid-training and post-training. There are different ways for that, but roughly speaking, if you start from scratch, this is what is called pre-training. Mid-training, if you add some governance or procedure, at any way you start to do some thing like reinforcement learning and things like that. And post-training, you just enhance on that. Okay, there are different ways to do that, and depending on the architecture you're using and the actual way to do your post-training technique. Last year was mostly reinforcement learning for human feedback. Now there are different ways with like GRDPO, popularized by DeepSeek. But regardless of that, the prediction of last year was a top performing post-training model. We ranked top 2 on specific art to reproduce, like for example I believe we call it the math math benchmark, things like that. Well, I would say almost right, as in DeepSeek version 2 was a post-trainer model, as I say, post-trainer with GRPO based on the latest DeepSeek model that was on the media last year in January, reached gold level score on IMO 25, CMO 24, a near perfect 118 out of 120, or Putnam 24. So I would say this is almost right. As I say, I should change a bar in this slide, just notice that. But wrong data will be proprietary. There are no signal, that's why it's almost. There is no signal that this result has been achieved using proprietary data. Well, frankly, we don't know it, as in most even open source labs, things like that, they may use under the counter, so to speak, proprietary data, but hey, I cannot claim they use proprietary data, therefore I say it's almost. A data labeling queen will enter in the race with data proprietary model, ranking top 10 in the benchmark. Yes, Amazon, which is technically a data labeling services with SageMaker ground truth. Nova 2 Premium is top 11 or top 9 depending on in the benchmark. As an important note, when I saw the top 9, top rank, when I consider the ranking, obviously you will see I consider one model per families. Nowadays, most of the top models like GPT 5.2 it releases the max, the medium version, the upper some version, things like that. So basically, it's the same model, but with a little bit more or less post-training technique. Therefore, the performance may be or more or less or maybe they have like quantization, things like that. They will reduce the precision of the reply or the response. So therefore, it's the same model, but just fine-tuned or again post-trained or quantized or not, depends what they do. But it's again the same model, although it may appear 2-3 times in the same ranking as it was a different model. In my judgment, it's not correct. This is most of the best lab today release model in families. So a family has different version of the model. It's not correct possibly to count that in my judgment. A GLP variant VA software model contributed to optimize this design will start FDA approval process. So if you remember, I believe was one of the last precision I did last year is a GLP-1 drug. If you remember, GLP drug are the drug that are very effective against diabetes and against obesity. There are few companies that are famous of that. One of these is Novo Nordisk, and the other one, if I pronounce it correct, is called Eli, something like that, an American company, and the other one is from Denmark, it's a Danish company. Anyhow, they at least today the majority share. These two companies are the majority share in the market for this kind of drug. Again, against diabetes and obesity, is frankly a potential huge market. Therefore, what this was one of the reasons why I predicted that if you use AI in a certain way, etc., the new incumbent or things like that, they could basically be competitive against huge company like Eli or Novo Nordisk, while having much limited budget than them if using AI correctly. Answer was half right. Mine work AI, and another one, immunoprecise. There we go. Antibodies design a GLP-1 track, or they announced that this is a GLP-1 receptor. Anyway, the drug, but at the moment is unknown if they started the FDA approval process. For that reason, I give myself a mark on that. I was right that using AI, a specific AI, which basically are derivation of what is called AlphaFold, which got the Nobel Prize, I believe, last year for chemistry from DeepMind. If you're using that right with reasonable limited budget, you can be competitive against very established the multi-billion-dollar pharma companies in producing this kind of drug. I was all right. They are doing that. They designed it using AI. It's possible to do it, but FDA approval process at the moment is unknown if they started. They may start it. They didn't announce it, but I need to give you my half right. Now, on top of 5 models, leaderboard for video image video or image. There will be a lot company coming from an emerging economy country. Yes, Kandinsky 5, Frostberry Eye, Russia, released, I believe, an image generation model. It was ranking in November 25. It was ranked first in open weight leaderboard 11 overall. 11 overall, but I believe it's ranked way higher than that, at least when it was released in the open source open way leaderboard. And so that was right. Not much to say about that. There is a reason why it's easier to get a competitive image of video generation rather than text, but I'll touch about that in another moment. A text image model not diffusion based will achieve SOTA top 10 on the leaderboard. Yes, Flux Shoe using a Flux. Remember, by the way, the leading architecture for LLM, so text-based or multimodal-based model, is Transformer. However, for image or text generation, the leading architecture is Diffusion. Okay. Now, it's been found out as this German company, Black Forest, using a modified, basically Transformer, can reach top 4 in the leaderboard for image regeneration, I believe. Yes, it was image generation model. It's not the only one. As I wrote, I hope I pronounced it correctly. OU1 image free, Tencent, Seed Dream, ByteDance. They use a multimodal diffusion transformer, again, hybridizing the model, not pure diffusion. They reached I believe they were top 10 as well in image or video generation. A mobile video game built with GenAI tool will be in the news. Yes, Alien vs. Zombie Invasion reached the news, claiming 4x less time in development due to AI tool. And this is a side there, although it's not strictly on the prediction, but I thought it was curious to at least mention that. Claire Obscure Expedition 33 reached the news, and it was stripped by a prize, an indie game prize, due to the use of Gen AI. So it reached the news not because, well, not only because he won a prize, the indie game prize, but also because he stripped the prize because the developer used or the production company used Gen AI tool to make it. Nvidia will debug the go-to chip for large cluster big order. Well, yes, there's not much to comment on that. If you see what happened, AMD will have at least 10% or more of the market for single or small GPU configuration. Well, this is half right. Well, first of all, we don't know, at least at the time of writing, we don't know the result of the last quarter, Q4 of sales 2025. But definitely, depending on the sources you're using, Nvidia has more than 94% of the market. AMD is between 6 and 8%. So definitely below even 8%, which I probably kind of sure is going to be confirmed, is below the target I set of 10%. Therefore, I have to say is half right. But it's very possible they will, when the data will be released, or maybe they already, I haven't checked, they will be more than 80%. So I give me half mark on that. A new chip maker, not Intel, Nvidia, AMD, will announce order for more than 500 million. Yes, Cerebras, for example, announced a deal for 100 billion in such markets. It could be considered that for sure. But regardless, Grok secured a 1.5 billion commitment from Saudi Arabia. And just below the mark, Blaze has ordered for about 400 million. So I would say that's right. A Society AI startup will be acquired by a large tech player for more than 100 million. Sentinel-1, 250 million acquisition from security. And then I think Carton Equity was acquired by AIM Security for 300 or 350 million, depending on the report. Here, a few that are wrong. There will be a serious remote vehicle accident using AI, which will raise awareness of car vulnerability. Now, that is bluntly wrong. It didn't happen yet. I do not think this is over yet. In fact, I will reiterate this prediction for this year. Unfortunately, and I know, by the way, I'm not happy to do this prediction, but I'm certain that at some point, unfortunately, we'll see a very not pleasant case of attack or cyber attack on drones or autonomous vehicle or related that create significant damage. AI regulation only related to automotive overall will increase in Western countries and China. Now, I have to say no, because that was the case. Although, if you see the recent news, China is starting to not do it to AI though, starting to regulate certain certain automotive features like the handle. The handle of the car now, excuse me, in China, cannot be retracted. It has to be visible and manually usable, not just retracted for aesthetics. There are signs like that, but anyway, I had to say I was wrong on that. Although, again, I don't think it's over. It could very well happen into the near future. At least one of the new proposals for watermarking combining blockchain and AI cryptography will be presented, but it will fail to make significant traction. Yes, there were a few products. Again, I can say, as far as I can see, there is no significant traction. There are many technical limitations, unfortunately, for watermarking solution. Therefore, which basically means deepfake or various types, image, audio, video, are very, very difficult to detect. That's what it means, basically. ChatGPT and competitor combined are used at least once by 40% of the US workforce. Yes, depending on the study, I cited one. Stanford study, USA workforce adoption was 43.2% as March or April. Uh, as of March or April 25, 45.9% on June, July 25, and 35.9 in December 25. If you do the average, I would say that was right. Top three non-first world countries with large outsourced workforces like India, Brazil, Indonesia, Philippines, things like that, have a combined 25% plus of traffic of ChatGPT and competitors. Almost. If you look at a certain report like Future Capitalist, Field Page Sage, they will report like 17.3% traffic, or India Brazil combined at 25.9. So if you do the average, possibly a little bit below 20 to 85 in average, but I would say that it wasn't that wrong. We have a tendency that instead of having people replaced by AI tools, the first adopter of these tools are actually the outsourced workforce. That's the inferred. That's where this prediction basically coming from. At least 50 agent accounts or with more than 100,000 followers will be built on blockchain. No, there were definitely less than 50 accounts on blockchain. And so I cannot claim 50 agents have been reached to my knowledge, using blockchain. Adoption of blockchain-based agent will be higher than OpenAI GPTs. Now, if you remember last year, Anthropic did the same, by the way. Like OpenAI, they build like a platform for a small tool to be like is now the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. So store, remember that, in which single developer can develop app to be installed in the phone, things like that. In the same fashion, OpenAI and Anthropic build their own ecosystem in which people can build their own, what they call a GPTs or close something. I don't remember exactly the name. Therefore, they can basically, all the user can download these little tools made by developers. Now, there is no traction on this ecosystem at all yet. Similar ecosystem or agent platform are more utilization, like virtuals.io agent. As I mentioned, that you can check yourself in few days or 24 hour, reach an activity of 200K US dollars. So definitely there's more traction in the blockchain community using different tools on the blockchain than people building their own little tool to resell or being used by the community, either OpenAI or Anthropic. KPO means knowledge process outsourced as an industry, which basically means when a company need a workforce to process I don't know, application, legal drafting, you name it, usually from a rich or first world country like the US, for example. They engage with a company like in India, Philippines, things like that, to have a workforce that process certain document for them for a discounted price. This is usually what is called knowledge process outsourcing. AI predicted they will grow faster than predicted using data from precedence research. There is no indication doing that. By the way, it's staying flat. It's still growing, 13.7%, but it's flat as it was last year. We keep seeing small narrow AI solution, the most adopted in precision function, while large sophisticated model adoption in processes will be slow, especially in regulated industries. Almost. I cited a Databricks studies which said that 70% of users choose model with 13 billion parameter, which is a small model, or fewer. Or according to McKinsey, though, industry like financial institutions, insurance, engineering, construction, transport, and retail are the ones that are using AI solution the most. I have to say almost, because I was predicting the very regulated industry like healthcare are actually have a certain degree of adoption, although they use narrow solution as I was predicted. So I cannot say I was exactly right. I was definitely right. The small or narrow scope AI solution are the one most adopted because it's easy. There are various reasons for that, but definitely I was a bit wrong on which industries uh, it was a bit wrong. I predicted it will be anyway, but I wasn't certain that very regulated industry will be that fast to adopt it. So that's why I say almost. US admin workforce will not lose more than 1% due to AI. I put a link of the federal, I think it is the Federal Reserve of San Luis, the link down there. Yeah, as you can see, you said there is no observation on massive workforce. Now, there is a caveat to say there are many people that think, at least in the last year, we reported number that are not exactly right for political reason. I had to mention that, but hey, until I have serious data about that, I can only say it was right. On top of that, it's not certain that the admin workforce, I specifically say the admin workforce, yeah. By the way, in that link you will find the office administrative support occupation. I'm specifically talking about this occupation because I'm the only one that can say with a degree of certainty they are the one affected by AI, right? Because admin services, it's literally the service you try to automate first, even based on the previous prediction, right? So very narrow specific task, like summarizing a document, processing a signature, whatever that is, very narrow specific document is exactly an admin kind of task. Therefore, is the most prone in my judgment automation. Therefore, why I did the prediction that even in that case, there will be a massive redundancy on that. There will be more things to do anyway. I mentioned that because, yes, it's true that many are questioning the data, the US workforce statistical data of the last year. But yeah, even if they were wrong, I'm not even sure is wrong in the sector of admin workforce, yeah, which is the one that I'm interested due to AI adoption that possibly create displacement or redundancies. Next, average AI rollout will still be around eight or between 8 and 12 months in large companies. I know I can't claim it's right or wrong. I still think it's true, but I can't claim that. I still think A large organization need a significant amount of time due to regulation, the different boards they have, the procedure they got to adopt AI. But I cannot claim either I'm wrong or right. US will establish a nationwide education program to reskill the workforce. Yes, in April 25, Trump announced a youth AI education policy and program. We see interest in early stage will grow 15% compared to the previous year. And that was a resounding yes. It was 36% compared to 2024. By the way, if you look why I say that, I think I say even in the video last year, it was kind of obvious. Well, there is a the easy prediction, which in fact I don't even think is a prediction. There is still a concentration in small number of players in later stages of investment, like Series B, C, D, things like that, due to the fact that the short list player are already kind of pre-selected. OpenAI, Anthropic, things like that are very difficult now that someone that start today can compete with them. Therefore, there is a concentration of money in these very few play, a large concentration in very few players. However, due to the fact that to DeepSeek and things like that, they're now opening the application layer that is possible to invest small amount of money in few startups that just do an application, basically application using foundation model by the big ones like OpenAI, things like that, and yet do a successful business. That's why I think the investment is coming to the very early stage today. To the very reason why, to be honest, is the very reason why I got it right. The prediction of GPL1 drug. Remember prediction 4? I say that basically new startups with a limited budget can now develop drugs if they use AI correctly and competitive with big pharma. Is the same reason basically. The reason why it got me right, the prediction for small startup competing with basically limited budget of big pharma is the same reason why I got right the prediction on VC interest. It is the same thing. VC realized that now it's possible in the application layer with a limited amount of money to compete in specific application. A startup with data labeling capability reached a startup with data labeling capability reaches 30 billion plus evaluation. Well, Scale AI was valued at 29 billion. So it's almost before it being acquired, the founder by Meta. And also, by the way, just to say, Surge AI, there is not a definite number, but Surge AI, which is possibly the most direct competitor of Scale AI, or at least it was since it was acquired, the valuation, you can look yourself, between 15 and 30 billion. So basically is almost, I got it right. New data center construction due to AI will cool off, a big stability emerge as the bottleneck. Now, it definitely was true that way more people now are not just talking about energy production, which part of the problem, but wasn't the main problem. The main problem, if you study the data from last year, as we correctly say, is the grid, not necessarily production of energy. Because if you produce more, but the grid cannot cope with that, it's not working anyway. So the grid is major problem, but we kind of not got it right that the data center has been paused. There must be indication due to environmental concern, regulation, etc., that this year may be paused. That's for also the reason why many are starting to accelerate on data center in space. I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but definitely I can only say I'm right. Definitely grid was emerging as a problem. Many media newsletter are talking about that now compared to the last year, but no, I cannot say data center being posed yet. There were a few that have been posed. I believe one from Oracle has been posed or things like that, but majority is still going on. 2% of News X account with more than 100,000 followers will be agent unknown. Can't say much about that. So as you can see, judge yourself. We were pretty right or wrong depending on the situation, or depending how you consider that. Now, based on that, the structure of the report of this year, as it was the years before, to be honest, is first giving an overview of the latest research AI advancement. Probably this is the bit that, yeah, I try to be concise on that, but just to clarify, this is not called as a catalyst trend, but in effect, the best AI advancement is a catalyst trend per se. What I mean by that is you cannot understand or infer what's going to happen in 1 year from now if you don't understand what's possible or not in research today. Just to give a very clear idea about that, first you need to have at least indication that something is possible in the research, then is going to be possible in the industries, right? If you don't see any indication that something is possible in research, someone claiming that certain solution will be ready in 1 year, well, as a rule of thumb, you should doubt that. Yeah. So, excuse me. Let's move on that. Again, I cited that last year anyway, but it never too much in this sense. DeepSeek R1, the famous, which was very misquoted in many ways, in regardless of how cheap it was to train and things like that. But regardless, it was definitely a breakthrough in many technical aspect of it. By the way, again, to remind the viewer or the viewer of this live, these keep themselves in that paper January 25. They wrote they couldn't do what they wrote without the previous research, the previous etc. of the large player, EA, OpenAI, Microsoft, DeepMind, things like that, etc. Read that. They never said it was possible with few quiz do what they said. Never. And they will say also that future development will require massive amount of investment. They wrote that. So whoever quoted that with few quiz now everything is possible, I don't know. At least read the original paper. That said, yes, definitely. The reason why was is important. If you remember, I tried to make the distinction pre-training, mid-training, and post-training. They define a new way to do definitely the post-training or reinforcement. Usually, don't be reinforcement learning with verifiable feedback. They were successful with a new way of post-training. Go GRPO is a technical stuff. This is not the life of that, but just to make you aware of that there are new ways, not only this. By the way, competitive to each other, and nobody know exactly which one is best at this very time of writing. Depending what you read, they say a post-training technique is better than the other, but frankly today there is no consensus on which post-training technique is better. Let's see more recurring reasoning with tiny networks. Now this paper is important because it highlights that it's possible to have very tiny model, 7 million parameter. To give an idea, even a small model today are 10 billion parameter. It's still considered a small model if it has 10 billion parameter or less. Yeah, still considered small. These model are 7 million compared to billion. Okay, yeah, in certain benchmark, etc., perform better than LLMs in solving specific problem or specific benchmark. This is a breakthrough because he is basically saying that quality is better than quantity. Now, if you read this report for at least 2-3 years, you will see that this is something that I already say many times. Quality is definitely more important than quantity, is increasingly more so, which basically means yes, you can scale, you have low scaling and more compute and more parameter, things like that. But at the end of the day, there is a lot of room to improve on the quality, the architecture, the sophisticacy of the algorithm per se. That's what it's saying. It's not just about slamming huge amount of data, slamming huge amount of compute, and you have the best. Yes, it's linearly true. There are papers that showed definitely you can have an improvement on that, but it's also very, very true, as this paper shows, that if you got right small models, especially in specific, if you train a small model in a specific task, is going to be good and competitive with the large ones. I say that again. If you train a small model, this paper basically is showing that if you train a very small model, 7 million compared to billion, and it's still 10 billion is considered a best, a medium model, if not still small, is it competitive with a large model? Yeah? Or the opinion I don't like. Okay. Block diffusion. If you listen so far, I say many times that at least for text or multimodal models, the most competitive leading architectural model today is what is called a transformer, attention transformer model. Now, again, but they were emerging since last year other competitive architecture, which is the diffusion, which mostly is for image or video generation. By the way, what was missing, and it start to emerge in research, as this paper shows. It's not the only paper, by the way, but I choose one, this block diffusion paper. They possible to hybridize what last year I call mixture of architecture. Now, they didn't follow my label, mixture architecture. Now they call it hybrid models. That's fine, but it's the same concept. Now there are emerging research. It's possible to combine in the same model different architecture. Diffusion with autoregressive, which basically means is a structure within the transformer. Let's put it that way. So it wasn't known if it's possible to combine them. Yeah. Well, there were indication inference even last year, but increasingly more is possible now. Okay. Now, training agent inside of scalable world model introduced Dreamer 4. I don't remember which one it is that developed that. I believe it's Meta. I could be wrong. But anyway, there is this new Dreamer 4 model, which is based on what is called the world model. Basically, is a way there are pre-loaded knowledge or build the knowledge of the world around you. It's a context for another day, but it's not just about training the model like reinforcement learning and learning what you have around, but there is a concept of world model. So basically, you have a understanding of the physics and the world around you inject into the model or being trained into the model in a different ways. Is a subject for another day. I'm not entering into that, but definitely is basically saying that using a world model algorithm inside an agent for a video, for a training for video games, is now possible to train agentic players, basically automation or playing a video game with just one GPU. To give an example, just a few years ago, in 2022, one of the best agent solution that was playing a video game required 720 GPUs. Now with one GPU, we can reach roughly the same result, but again, using a very different architecture, let's put in or algorithm within the model, we can use just one GPU instead of 720. So that, okay, is not textual LLM or multimodal, is for playing video game, automation or playing video game, which basically is related to robot, is showing you that there's a lot on top or new things we can use and discover in terms of architecture rather than playing that dumb put more compute, put more data, put more parameter kind of game to get more performance. Yeah, there's a lot more to do in terms of optimization of models. Now, Quen Free technical report. This is for a Chinese company. Again, the reason why I mentioned that as a best AI advancement is because they are replacing, if you remember, until last year, the beginning of the last year, the best open source model were from Meta, the Llama family, Llama 3, now there is Llama 4, doesn't matter. But for the first time, there was first of all, there was a family or Chinese model, Quen3, that topped the benchmark as a family. Yeah, of course, there was also DeepSeek, but not as a family. This was the first family as a Chinese models, and they used a combination of architecture kind of that way that was never used before. One is gated delta attention. Attention is a classical transformer, although it's multi-headed. There are a different thing inside that, but still, is a derivation of that. And they use it ultra sparse, which mixture architecture is something invented by basically Mistral a few years ago, 2 years ago, if I remember correctly. But they get to the next level doing that ultra sparse, which basically means a model that is able to become very light in terms of parameter usage and RAM and things like that when you're fine tuning. Hence, there is a different families. However, the dense models of the large quotes, the more memory intensive, it still got the best results. Yeah, so there is that's why it's a family. So they kind of regulate the density of the model with the performance. The more dense and probably more performance you get, easier to do things on top, but also more computing. You need more RAM, more memory, more computing infrastructure to do that. The the the, the less dense it is, the lighter it is. So ultra sparse MOE mixture experts. Then is lighter in memory, but you lose a bit of performance. They kind of gradually did a farming over that was never done before. Some 3D, is something related to reconstruction of 3D object from a single image. If you remember a few years ago, I think it wasn't last year, 24, we started discussing a new emerging thing that was very, very at the beginning, 2-3 years ago, of creating 3D object from 2D images. Yeah. So they basically means that it was very at the beginning. I thought it was going faster. Again, this time I was too fast. It took at least 2 years. We are in 2026 now, but now you can see emerging good quality open weight model that can reconstruct 3D objects, so 3D images, so 3D object from a flat 2D image. Yeah, and also they show what is that these kind of new models on 3D is as a scaling law from LLM. As I said before, most of the LLM today follow a scaling law. The more power, the more data, etc. There is a linear law in performance. Yeah, they show that a similar law applied to this, which obviously is something very important for business, because in business you need to have an understanding how much money you will need to get a certain performance at a level. Having a scaling law like that, it make possible to basically build a business in a way, because you can predict the cash flow or the budget requirement to develop a model like that for a desired performance output. Hybrid quantum transformer for language generation. The first hybrid quantum classical transformer for language generation require only 10 qubits, approximately 80 quantum gates. Can effectively replace over 10% of classical parameter and 150 million scale model without any decrease in performance. Now, why that is important? Well, I would like to remind you, first of all, that this is still in quantum in general, as far as I understand, as far as I keep reading research about pure quantum, it's still kind of a research phase. What I mean by that, the commercialization of quantum depend on there are different types of that, but whoever is listening is in the quantum space, please don't get offended. But basically, there is no reliability of the final output, constant reliability of the final output. There are different tempo, coherence, whatever there is. There are different, in fact, there are even different approaches to quantum. But regardless, there is no reliability of the output, and it's so commercialization is still limited. However, there are emerging hybridization between quantum and AI, as this paper, and that shows that if you use quantum, you may scale down a an AI model in terms of parameter without losing performance. That possibly means if the AI will keep the reliability of the output, which is still missing on the quantum, yet quantum allows to reduce the model size. There's a win-win situation. Basically, you're combining the best from the whole world, from both worlds. Quantum still have a reliability problem. It doesn't have a reliability problem, but has a problem of amount of compute you need to have, to have the result. So if you combine the best for both, deleting the disadvantage for both, that's a win-win situation. And that's why I thought it was very important to cite at least this paper. Because if there are more indications that this is a good way, this is a real good path to commercialization of quantum. Because what you heard about reliability or coherence of the output, whatever that is, now it's less important if the AI can do that, while quantum can reduce the amount of compute necessary. Both the best of the both worlds. Lee JPA, probable and scalable self-supervised learning without the heuristic. First truly multimodal image, text, or video, embedding representation that are scalable across dataset architecture. Now, this is a bit technical. Let's see if I can simplify a little bit. So the problem on multimodal models is that, multimodal, like image, videos, text, or audio as well, to be honest, is there is no a unified way before this paper to take the data in. Therefore, without a unified way to process the input, the model were a little bit, how would I say, in a very informal and clunky, as in the way to combine the data happen at a very later stage in the model processing, and therefore it was basically very, very inefficient. To do something like that, having proven that this is working, it means that the multimodal model can become way more efficient, because from the beginning there is a way to, in a way, have a database that at the same time can combine all the elements in one point, which was not possible before. Again, I need to remind that any research, although it works, it usually needs confirmation. What I mean by that is, if I see in the next few months Lee Jipa come back to another team of researchers, come back to Lee Jipa version 5 something, there is a confirmation, which basically means is enough important that other are using the same thing. Yeah, that's important to notice as well. Nitrogen, an open foundation model for generalist gaming agent based on Groot and 1.5. Plays 1,000 video games of different type, RPG, basically wargaming, racing, etc. 50% are used to test and train a model in unseen games. Now, that's why is important, because we are getting model that never seen a video games, in this case thousands of video games, yet using this solution can generalize much better. That also means the necessity of training or pre-training, etc., diminish. In other words, there is a way to scale model for robotics in tasks that never been seen. That's what he's saying. So basically, this is an open door for robotics. Robotics is very difficult. The tasks are one of the main difficulty in robotics is having a model that, well, in robotics in general, the tasks are already always a little bit different, factory to factory, task by task, etc. So not exactly the same. So you need model that can generalize a little bit, and that's exactly what he's showing. So he's showing a model that is able to generalize without training on different tasks. In this case, video games, but still, that's why it's related to robotic. Without this kind of research, the robotic field cannot happen. You see what I mean? So you need to see in research models that are able to generalize without having seen the task in the training. Without that, robotics is a bit difficult. This is one of the problems of robotics, but definitely one of the major ones. So you need models able to generalize. Never seen a task, different task, yet they need able to play. Yeah? Without that, robotics is a bit difficult. There are others, by the way. The model needs to be locally nano, energy draining. The task needs to be complex. But hey, if they play video game, the task is complex enough. That's the thing. The art of scaling RL compute for LLMs. Unify different, basically post-training technique, reinforcement affirmation and others, and reasoning into a predictable law creates a standardized open source receipt scale RL, which can be used to predict RLA training error into expected performance on the final model. Now, you really remember, so there was already what basically before this paper, there was a training law, but was only for pre-training, which basically means if you have model from scratch and you train with a certain amount of data compute, you can infer the performance. So basically, based on the budget, how much money you can spend on compute and data training, you can infer the performance of a pre-trained model. Before this paper, there was no way to relate the budget you're going to spend on post-training, I believe also mid-training for the matter, but definitely post-training, to how much money you spend on post-training technique to the actual performance of the model, which basically means it's difficult to do a business prediction or model cash flow, financial statement, whatever, for the business. With that, is now possible, and that's why it's a breakthrough. Yeah. And then last but not least, I thought it was very important to mention this is all connected, a journey. I couldn't write because I didn't want to add a necessary page. By the way, this is definitely a page from Google. A proved that transformer, recurrent neural network, state, static state network like Mamba are actually the same architecture. What the paper called associative memory machine. If you remember, I say multiple times that today, at least for LLM, textual or multimodal, the leading architecture is still transformers based. For Gen AI tool for image or video, the leading architecture is diffusion. Yeah? We always thought that these two architectures are actually, first of all, very difficult to combine, although I show you a paper, block diffusion, that is now it's possible to combine. This goes further. Not only is possible to combine, but these papers show that what we thought was very different architecture are actually the same architecture with different parameters. And that changed, in my judgment, anything, because it's definitely based, first of all, is a confirmation that it's possible to combine them, since it's just changing the parameter. You basically have both. They are not two separate words. Diffusion and transformer / tension architecture, not two different separate architecture, but the same thing with different parameters, basically. And therefore, yes, if there is any confirmation necessary, this paper definitely confirm that in the future we will have models that are hybrid architecture. because basically are the same one with different parameters. This is you cannot have a better confirmation than a theoretical or practical proof that diffusion and transformers are actually the best, which basically means from an architecture point of view, we should be able in the near future to combine the best of the both world. Again, there are pros and cons in both. I'm not going into that, but transformers are more precise. Let's say very brutally, the reason why we use transformer today is because is somehow the precision and the performance better, although we need more compute. Diffusion are very efficient to train, but they're very efficient to train, so less compute, but it's not actually so easy to put the compute to have the same performance. That's the trade-off. But now it seems very evident that will be possible in the near future to combine and have the best of the both world, as they are, as the paper called them, both associative memory machines, not two separate architectures, separate world. And with that, I think you get at least an idea what 2025 was in terms of research, which I want to highlight few parts before getting to the trends and then the prediction. First, as you can see from research, in my judgment, we are gonna go beyond what we call the transformers. Now, I think even this year the best model will be transformer based. I'm gonna talk about that in the presentation. Definitely will have very performant models. They are very small, and the necessity to compute will be still necessary for the best performing model, because the scaling law, as the reinforcement learning purpose training show anyway, but we still can have very niche models specializing in one thing that are competitive, which means we can have local install model adoption, local as in within a perimeter, within a computer, things like that, that will be competitive in at least one specialized task, whatever that is. And at the same time, since now it's possible to have localized models, so limited hardware, still decent capabilities, and it's possible now to train, as you say, this paper Dreamer 4, right? Train with one only GPU. Now you can have an agent that play a lot of video games. Robotic can happen. That's what he's saying. So there are different ways to say roughly the same things, which is robotic now is in the good path for commercialization, as research is showing that it's possible to have reasonably performant model within little hardware, which is basically what a robot is. There is possible to generalize on them. Yet the best performance will still be with the best compute, or the most compute you can have, as the scaling law require even for post-training. And you possibly, but don't believe that you're gonna break through this year, but confirmation for sure, or quantum plus AI. And that's in short. Okay, so if you need to take anything from this brief analysis of research, localization of model, robotic is now a possibility because research is so. And yeah, compute for the best leading edge models still playing this part. The best compute, the best budget, the largest budget in compute still playing a best for the very least model. But you can have a specialized model. They do one thing, but they do very well, competitive to the best money you can spend on a general model. That said, let's come back to the predictions, and let me check quickly if your question. Usually I don't have anyone on this. No, there is any. There is any. Okay, cool. Let's move on. Let's move on on the secular trend. I give an overview of the secular trend, and then catalyst trend, and then I start the prediction. Let's see how much time I will spend on that. Secular trends. Now, as I said before, again, I'll repeat very quickly before I started to do that. The secular trends are the reason why the reason why analyzing secular trend is because this is one of the first components that allow me to get into the trend prediction. Okay, as I wrote before, any prediction come from secular trend plus catalyst trend, contingent event. Therefore, I can infer a prediction. Secular trends that are happening for 10 years or more, are very stable, impossible for anyone, any government, any policy maker to modify or to move. While catalyst trends are definitely politically influenced and prone. I'm gonna talk about that soon. So first secular trend is, as I said before, human machine hybridization. So basically, whether we like it or not, we are hybridizing with machines. As I said before, if you look at 2020, at the early 2000s, we just invented or started to use a search engine and a mobile phone. Yeah. Now, who can't live without a mobile phone? I don't think many, right? So it basically means that although the mobile phone is external, is a separate part from us, yeah, it's something indispensable for our daily life. I don't think there is anyone that can claim to live without it. Then we got a step further in 2010, in which we have devices that touch directly or in constant touch of our skins, like the smartwatches or the iPod or things like that. Yeah, you see now we have devices that constantly monitor us, the health of our constant touch in our skin for different reasons. 2015, when possibly we have devices that now we can interact that directly by voice, smart device like Alexa or things like that. 2020s, we had the beginning of virtual headset like the Apple one, the Ray-Ban with the camera, and obviously uh, ChatGPT and the like. Now we are starting to see, I believe, 2025 devices that again are even more enhancing our performance, definitely touching our skin constantly, like the Nike Amplify, which basically you can look around, is in a way fascinating, at least it is for me. So it's not just a shoe from Nike, but it's also, as you can see in the picture, you see this thing that goes and attached to your leg. It helps you to possibly make less effort or the right effort in your walk or run. To the very end, obviously there are already significant investment, I would say, in things like brain-computer interface, which basically means we not only like is today, we are um, constantly touched or by machines like our smartwatch, in a way also the phone, the smartwatch, the smart glasses, things like that. But in the future, directly our brain will be in contact with machines, and that's the end, the brain computer interface. Whether we like it or not, again, secular trend means trend cannot be stopped. No policy, it can be delayed or accelerated, sure, but cannot be stopped. Whether we like it or not, this kind of trend cannot be stopped. That's the way it is. The other one, a secular trend, is actually aging. Not much to say about that. Is a trend. It is what it is. The population around the world is 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 getting older and older. By the way, when I say around the world, I mean it for sure. African countries in general do more kids than European or Chinese or Asian. But yeah, even them are decreasing. If in the 90s, I just say some number in the I don't remember the number, but you can look yourself. I think Nigeria is one of the highest birth rate in the world. If the 90 was 10, now is 7. Let's say like that. The number are invented now, but for the sake of understanding, even in places like it was very high, it's still very high, but lower than in the 90s. Yeah, like Nigeria, for example. And again, important to notice, this trend cannot be modified. Yeah, for sure, there are many attempts to modify that, giving a benefit if you have kids, things like that. Unfortunately, there is very limited effect, even politically, on moving these trends. Obesity and health, again, this is a global trend. Uh, in a way they are contradicting to each other in the sense that definitely we have a percentage of obese population that is growing. At the same time, there are niches in the market that's more related to the catalyst trend, especially in the last few years, that to counteract this obesity trend, we have health health well-being startup, yeah, or whatever you want, pills or integrators, whatever that you want for well-being. Okay, now this is obviously important because this is also secular trend. It means that the spend compared to GDP in health services or the government spending these things is higher and higher, will be higher every day. Just to give you data, the Qatar, Egypt, and USA have an obesity rate of more than 40% compared to 8% of China and Japan. Yeah. And that is unfortunately is continuing to rise. I don't see this is why a secular trend. Our politics can influence that. Definitely are doing something, but again, it's very difficult to move the secular trend, whatever that is. Asian growing economies. This is a secular trend. It's happening for more than 10 years. Definitely, we used to have a wording in Western society, mostly Japan, Europe, and US at the majority of the largest economies in the world. They still are, but the tide is changing. The shift towards Asia is continuing. So the growth of GDP in Asia in general is larger than here. So in a compounding way, in the near future, they will become like China is today, uh, become stronger and stronger economy. Just to give you an overview, I believe it was Goldman Sachs in 2023 or 2024 predicted that Indonesia will be a top 5 economy in 10 years from now. Just to give a quick overview on that too. And again, it's a secular trend. Nobody can actually move this trend, okay? War polarization. Now, this is definitely a secular trend because in my judgment, well, it depends when you want to start the trend, but definitely at the end of the Cold War, so talking about early 90s, the collapse of Berlin Wall, if you like, a specific event roughly around that time. The world first become very US based, US influenced as the only superpower present in that time, and now it's definitely becoming more polarized, as in definitely China and US. They both exert their influence on different countries, but more and more individual countries, you can see they try to avoid to be necessary one part on the other, I'm not here to decide whether it is right or wrong, but I believe AI can be contested for sure, be criticized, that's okay, but I think this is a secular trend, as in there's not this willingness to take side definitively as it was before. So there are countries that may like certain policy of a superpower like China or US, whoever it is, but not all the policies. Therefore, you have more individualization and splitting of the world depending on circumstances, which make the situation more complex and fluid rather than every two parties, and that's it. Basically, just to clarify what I'm saying is there's more chaos in the world. Let's put it that way. Now, again, I just finished to analyze all the trends that cannot be moved. Okay, it's very difficult to move these trends. Yes, for sure, politics can try to move them. It may accelerate or decelerate, but these are going to happen anyway. Yeah, that's different in the case for catalyst trend. Yeah, catalyst trend again are trends that are into effect on 5 years or less, and they can be very impacted. In fact, it's not initiated directly from political reasons, and that usually have an immediate effect. Yeah, and they such a subject to abrupt change. Yeah, that's not happening with aging. Basically, there's no way there an event, a specific event, a specific election of a president, whatever that is, can affect directly the aging trend of the hybridization term. Okay, no, it's possible though that individual event may affect directly the catalyst trends. Okay, now let's have a look at them. First of all, governance. As you may know, or at least from me from the last few report, the most famous one is the UI Act, which now we can say definitely is one of the reference in the world regarding AI governance and AI regulation. Even US before was not regulating, but what happened is every individual state started to do some regulation of some sort of AI. That, guess what, is way worse than having one unified regulation, because for a company following any of the, I believe, 50 states, I don't know how many US states there are, but let's settle with 50. Apologies if I don't remember the exact number. But anyway, if 10, even a dozen of states, which I think is correct, all US states started to regulate AI, but even if a dozen do their own regulation, slightly, even if slightly different, for a company it's way worse than having one reference regulation, which is actually what's happening now. I think President Trump announced a federal act or law that ban single as each state to regulate by its own in AI matters, has to be a federal law about which is basically enforced in all countries. To me, makes sense. Including having a split regulation, and the UAI Act is possibly, it wasn't certain, but now I can say it was the right way to go. It's not necessarily right in terms of load of governance, that is still in discussion, but it's definitely right in terms of having one regulation for all the European countries rather than one, everyone does his own. Definitely that was right. It's still in discussion. In fact, it's still in discussion how the UAI may be delayed or postponed, but yeah, is one of the main regulation and still possibly as a structure the right approach today. Just to mention though, there are jurisdictions and countries that have low touch or light touch in AI regulations and governance. These are Australia, Israel, Japan, India, Singapore, Russia, and Middle East country like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. Nevertheless, roughly speaking, any jurisdiction is interested to at least regulate what is called the high risk. There is different definition what the high risk means. For example, if I remember correctly, California, they started that high risk is AI system with 500 million US revenue or more. Other like the UAI set the principle of impact or on human life. Hence, everything that is related to healthcare, education is considered high risk. Yeah, and therefore you need a quite detailed and cumbersome in a way uh, level of governance and check and procedure, including cybersecurity. Yeah. Again, this is still, although there are companies that are abiding to it, it's still there is pressure from the business world in Europe to at least delay the take into effect of most of the regulation, which is supposed to be starting with this August 2026. To give you an idea, to the current AI governance in Europe, since August 2025, there was a code of conduct, yeah, code of conduct for general purpose AI. General purpose basically the foundation model. That what it means. Not all companies sign for that. So major player, European player that sign is Mistral. Then you have partially Grok, XAI, Elon Musk stuff. Microsoft, Google sign it. Meta refused to sign it, and most Chinese players, to my knowledge, today did not sign the general purpose code of conduct of AI that was into effect since August 25. What it means in practice, it means that if you want to use commercially any of the Chinese model or meta model for the matter, all you can, but all the regulation, all the government come to you only. Yeah, no support for the company that didn't sign it. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean if he is Mr. You have nothing to do or you have no governance to you to do, but yeah, significantly less since the developer of the model already abiding to the code of conduct. This is just an overview. Over stay tuned. This, as you can see, is a trend that is keep going and will impact both adoption and industry spending for the next few years. Again, let's move again. Human and synthetic data. Human and synthetic data and hybrid data regeneration. If you remember what I said in the introduction when I explained one of the prediction, the production or generation of data is definitely increasing, both human, synthetic, and now hybrid data generation. It's a new term, but it's worth taking note of that because now it's becoming blurry to distinguish what's human is what's synthetic. As I said before, the easy way to understand this, if you use any Gen AI tool to generate an image from a prompt, that image is generated. Now you want to edit it manually, let's say with Photoshop, whatever. Of course, you can edit with Gen AI too, but for the sake of the example, let's imagine you generate manually or you retouch something. Now it's not possible to claim that that image is 100% synthetic. It's a hybrid. Another, I believe, very valuable example is coding. So I'm sure you heard a lot about vibe coding or code generator by whatever tool you like, Anthropic code, whatever that is. Yeah. Now, yeah, that code, that task can be synthetic, right? Like if it's one line is broken, it doesn't work. At that line, well, if one line does, if the code doesn't work, it is one line with one bug. that code doesn't work. It's still syntactic, but it doesn't work. If a human solve it, you have 100 lines, let's say, and one line contain the bugs, and the human fix the bug. Yes, there are 100 lines and one corrected by a human. I will not claim whatsoever that this data, this code is synthetic. At the very least, is hybrid. You can also argue that the value of the fixing the bug is more important than the 200 line or underline, whatever, the length of the code. But that's a discussion for another day. Definitely, that's the point for this slide. There is a catalyst trend of human, synthetic, and so hybrid data generation increasing. All right. Now, move on. Cloud and data centers growth. Again, there is much about that in the news, so I don't feel compelled to spend too much time on that. It's definitely going more and more spending, more budget is allocated by the hyperscaler on creating cloud and data centers. You can read a few numbers from this line. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I'm almost 2 hours speaking, so I want to go to the prediction in a reasonable time. But the only thing I want to mention that is something that I'm very surprised very few talk about that is the status of the data centers. Yeah. So I don't know how many reflect of the number of data centers in the world. But to give you an overview, there are three, depending on the statistic, I wrote 4,000 in this report, but it's between, for to be precise, I read an Visual Capitalist report yesterday, I believe. It say there were in USA there were 3,500. I reported for 4,000 data center in US. The second one is Germany, UK, and China. Yeah, almost each of them with 500 data centers. Imagine that you have 10 times more data centers in US than the second, which is roughly Germany, with 5,000. Sorry, 500. Yeah, 4,000 roughly speaking US. Second place on number of data centers, Germany, 500. Okay, that means, and you can check with different data, that most of the traffic of the world, or consumption of data, or consumption of API product, you name it, at some point touch the US. To the point, if you dig a little bit deeper, you will see that Virginia and Northern Virginia is as a massive lion's share of or worldwide data traffic. Depend on the estimate, just Virginia and North Virginia, the US state, has a massive lot. You can see different statistics on that, but I would say about 10 or 20%, like Mordo Cardinal user, right, that of the world bandwidth goes to Virginia. I would say that again, between 10 and 20% of the world bandwidth goes to Virginia, USA. So basically, whatever you're doing, no matter if you're in the Philippines, in Nepal, as me in London, roughly 20% of whatever you do touches Virginia, or especially Northern Virginia data center. This is something to reflect, and this also reflected why there is a trend on sovereign data centers and things like that, because at the moment it's very difficult to change that in the next few years. The entire world is basically reliant on US data centers to do basically everything related to the internet. Yeah. I believe that is worth to consider. Again, the data is USA data centers about 4,000. The closest, Germany, is around 500. And China is about 500, I would say. Yeah. Now, of course, it's a bit different if you consider in around the energy consumption. Still, US is ahead with 180 terawatt hour. And secondly, China with under 2 terawatt hour, basically double. So that means somehow, somewhere, everyone is touching data centers or US data centers. Okay, a capacity US is expanding possibly at the same rate of the rest of the world. So you will still, majority of the world, somehow, somewhere, reliant on US to perform a variety internet-related tasks. That's the way it is. I think this is a very, very important point. Not gonna change too much into the future, but I believe this is an important fact, at least to remember that. Okay. Now, move on. Catalyst, trend catalyst for energy supply and demand imbalances. First of all, you may heard or not, if you follow, when I say energy, I mean everything related to energy, from coal, nuclear, renewable, oil and gas, everything. Yeah. It's true that fossil fuel will kind of diminish, but still in the long term. By the way, these data for the International Energy Agency, yeah, the most established agency studying these things. Yeah, it's not thing they're just invented or things like that. No, it's from the EIA. Okay, and still they said that between 40 to 60% of the energy supply will be fossil until 2050. Now, and possibly 10% of the total will be absorbed by data center by 2030. However, the additional demand by 2035 of energy due to data center mostly is basically two demand. There are two different demands for energy today. One is data center, and the other one, as far as I understand, is cooling. Yeah, cooling for refrigeration, but mostly also for is basically for in the hot countries, also due to possibly climate change. You need basic air conditioning. You need a lot more air conditioning. Okay, this is the main so far demands of energy today. The but regardless, yes, there will be still a significant amount of fossil fuel by 2050, but the additional demand by 2035 will be met purely by renewables. That means we have about 9-10 years in which the fossil fuel still will be very, very important, but by 2035, any new demand by 2025 should be expected to be covered by purely renewable. The problem, obviously, are you reach 2035. A second is there is depletion of current oil and fossil fuel wells. Therefore, we need to replenish whatever. Regardless, we need to replenish whatever wells and basin we already have. Just to give an example, US possibly oil production is peaking in what is called the Permian Basin. Is peaking, that means that needs to be even beyond 2035 replenish it or replace it with something else. Yeah, we need to stay. It basically means we can do a lot with renewable, but we need to at least keep the same production as roughly speaking we have today, possibly a little bit more if you see the graph. So the question is how to keep the same production a little bit more as we have now. Okay. Also important to understand that production, demands is not necessarily growing all around the world. It's definitely growing US and China, but not too much in Europe. The reason are twofold. Demand is a bit flat. France has a surplus of energy. Germany has basically now less production, as it was very related to automotive and things like that, but automotive production is decreasing a lot. And the decreasing of the industrialization of car or metal manufacturing in Germany or countries like that has been rebalanced by the growing of data centers demand. So in Europe, you diminish automotive or car manufacturing, but you increasing data center energy demand. So this balance out, roughly speaking. Let's say energy supplies as this imbalancing, yeah. So not all part of the world need more energy. Definitely US, definitely China or other parts. The Middle East possibly, because again there is air conditioning demand, things like that, due to climate change and things like that. But it's not a worldwide problem. At least it's not today, because demand in Europe is flat, for example. Worldwide main problem, again, while the demand is possibly flat in few regions like Europe, definitely is not. There is a worldwide problem in the grid, and that is being said by many different institutions, sources. You can read them, especially of long range high voltage line, which, by the way, long range high voltage line are the one needed for solar and wind supply, lean energy installation. Is obvious, right? Because usually wind turbines and or solar fields are in remote areas. Therefore, you need long range cables to make the supply happen. There is what is called NIMBY, not in my backyard movements, especially in US, which basically is trying to stop or delay permission of new implant and construction. And there is also scarcity of certain equipment or part of the energy plant, like the large power transformer, which is a part of basically, I'm not an expert transformer energy, but what I mean by that, there are different problems or different priorities. Definitely, first is the grid. Second and third depends on the jurisdiction and depends on which reports you read. So first problem in terms of priority around the world is the grid, the obsolescence of the grid, long range high voltage cable. Second and third depends on the jurisdiction, is permission due to the environmental constraint. People don't want the plant, things like that, and scarcity of certain specific plant equipment like LPT, large power transformers. This is the situation so far, but it's not clear. As you can see, there will be an immediate crash on the power supply network. Again, for example, Europe so far is kind of fine due to the decreasing in energy demand from automotive, for example. And in any case, you have a great problem before thinking about increasing the production to the grid. Crypto ecosystem development and AI. Now, obviously, you're talking about, as we speak today, 19th of February 26, of the main crypto. Bitcoin is going 69 something $1,000. And therefore, all the ecosystem is quite down. That not to say that the adoption is actually rising, especially in what are called stablecoin, Tether. So basically, crypto pegged to dollar asset, things like that. In fact, that is increasing and expected to increase even more. The reason is, by the way, absolute uncertainty. Yeah, there are also new regulation, for example, Property Act 25 in UK that consider crypto as a property. Regulated, there are Genius Act 25 in US that try to regulate the crypto matter, making basically not illegal to use them, or things like that. New the we observe in 25, possibly continue to do soon, the approval of ETF like Litecoin, XRP, Solana, and things like that, which basically means the adoption is increasing. Although the total price is could be down, but the adoption is definitely increasing. And at the same time, we still have in development and usage blockchain project. They are using, well, the way around, the AI project, they are using a decentralized solution like the blockchain to share either computer power, authenticate the data, training a model, you name it. Macrocosmos is one, is not mentioned here, but just to add one, or share also inference. Now, I had to, to be absolutely true on that. This process show an interest, or an interest to try to solve the decentralization of AI, but not necessarily there are not necessary solution that are gonna work. The main reason for that is to share AI compute, share AI inference, or things like that. At the moment, the bandwidth is too low between me sitting here and someone in the Philippines. Not like, where you download something on torrent, you chunk the file, you can download asynchronously in different parts of the file, then you combine the machine, you have it. There is a synchronization of steps and procedure when you want to have an inference task in different machines. This is very difficult to have in the current with the current large language model or Gen AI solution, which by definition they require a lot of bandwidth and computation in the parties. This is why, for example, Nvidia class are very good at it. They have huge amount of terabyte coming from one GPU to the lab within the same cluster, making the training very efficient or the inference very efficient, which is definitely not possible to replicate with this solution. The reason why I mentioned that, however, if you remember my analysis of the best AI advancement 1 hour ago now, I make you aware there's certain research that now able to show that small models, tiny models, are now potentially capable enough, performing enough. That trend continues. Small model definitely will require a lot less bandwidth. By the way, that combined also with diffusion. Diffusion, for various reasons, not entering now, is possible to use in more asynchronous way than transformers, but I'm not entering now on that. Suffice to say that while this project still failing, if they are combining with the best technology, best transformers of the large model today, if in the near future smaller enough model become capable enough, this will potentially combine very well with blockchain, because at that moment the bandwidth requirement will drop significantly, making probably blockchain to share inference or whatever else will be sufficient enough. And with that, I think it talk enough about this crypto ecosystem development and emerging with AI. Supply chain, localization, sovereignty, cloud, and workforce. Given the political overview, instability, supply chain are becoming localized and nearshoring. Again, this is definitely related to politics and company policies, which again, as a natural catalyst trend, may change very much depending on election or contingent event of various sources. But regardless, there is a trend now. I started possibly in 2022, just about after COVID, that countries prefer to have shorter but more expensive supply chain, and for various reasons. And so you see the US trying to manufacture chips inside the country. Samsung, TSM, and other Broadcom are opening or already opening chip factories within the country, within US borders, rather than just relying on import from, for example, Taiwan, for example. Um, you can see a few data that definitely confirm the improved reliance of the companies doing exactly what I just said. Localization, near shoring of the supply chain close to the country you need to provide the service to. Yeah. Combined with that, there is a trend of a sovereign cloud, which basically means a country try to provide a service within cloud within the same country and within its own governance. Some country have less, more, or just different technology governance. Therefore, they may prefer to have uh, processing within the border, within data centers inside the country. Of course, if you remember before, we have 4,000 data centers in US. The second is Germany and UK and China with about 500 each. That is a trend slow in becoming reality. There are too little data center, yet the investment they make the other data center limited. Therefore, you may argue the sovereign cloud is somehow is going on, but will develop very slowly, given the fact that the disproportionate of data centers today between US and the other countries. Um, and again, it is also important to say that given to this localization of the workforce, that obviously, especially in US, but also in other countries, it's very difficult to predict um, shortage in certain sector. Sorry, redundancy in certain sector, because regardless of the AI, in fact, is expected employment growth in healthcare, for example. If you expect a growth in employment in certain sectors, it's very difficult to predict that just because of AI you go in redundancy sector wise, for example, healthcare. Um, yeah. So now another one, for example, is manufacturing. Definitely, they are going to increase the number of manufacturers, so the manufacturing workforce, and it's difficult to understand if you're expecting a growth there, even if AI is expected to create redundancy. It's without AI, you expect a growth. At the very least, from growth, you go flat. You don't go under, right? It's a question of common sense. You don't go from expect a growth of 1% employment in, let's say, in manufacturing workforce to minus 5. Difficult. You go 1 plus 1 to possibly 0. That's also one other reason can make me a bit skeptical of mass redundancy. If you're already expecting a growth in certain sector, at maximum, from growth you go flat in growing the workforce. You don't go growth to straight redundancy. that's one of the main reasons I'm a bit skeptical of mass redundancy, at least in the next year. And that's also incentivized by localization, right? The more localization you want, the more local workforce employment growth you should expect. And the counteracting effect or possible counteracting effect of AI redundancy is diminished. We see investment in tech. Now, I'm gonna spend few moments here because I think most of the audience is are usually engaged for, at least that's what I see from who download the report, is related in some way or form to technology and technology investments, and not gonna spend too much on that. Yes, the main trend continues, so there is a concentration of capital in future listed winners: the OpenAI, Scale AI, Anthropic, Project Prometheus, XAI, Databricks, Adware, Hemisphere. Then we have few new players like Polymarket, Reflection AI, SSAI, a thinking machine, possibly the new foundation model, foundation started. They're coming basically 2 or 3. SSI, a thinking machine, sorry, by basically people that left OpenAI or similar. And then we have Mistral and Binance. Therefore, this trend is set to continue, I believe. We'll see what happens. Regardless, there is this concentration. It is something that we observe at least for the last 2 years. This is the first year in a row there is this concentration, which basically means it's very, very difficult to start in 2026 displace a foundation company. Yeah. Okay. Unsurprising, based on that, the number of deal is decreasing, right? Because if there is concentration on one, but the number of deals is decreasing. That's not a surprise. In fact, most of the money now is concentrating related to the total VC money, right? So the total venture capital money, most of the AI related fund is now is at least 50%, rather possibly is related to that, although it's not necessary to explicit. But I could say definitely if someone 50% is explicitly related to AI, the other 50% is possibly um not too much distant from that. Not definitely not unrelated. Mm, the other very important fact to unfortunately mention, at least it's unfortunate if you don't live in US, is the vast majority of VC money, depending on the stage, from early stage to later stage, is spent in US. Yeah. There is still today, if you look at the central picture on the slide, the vast majority of VC invested by far is in US. Of course, if you compare with China, it's not exactly the same because there is a difference in value of the currency. But still, even if you adjust for the currency, yeah, you change a little bit, but not too much. Yeah. Very important to notice is the robotics is started taking up, as I was already clear from the research. As I show you, there are a few research papers. And by the way, when I show research paper, there are few that I select, but obviously there are more than that. Now robotics reached 40 billion in VC investment in 2025, which is a massive increase with 74% compared to the previous year, 2024. C stages, as it was a prediction, is now increased to 36% compared to 24. Yeah. And with that, look, the again, you can see a picture of US keep spending and investing and believing in everything AI way more than all the other jurisdictions combined, possibly. And that making very difficult, I believe, that, how would I say, other countries can supersede US. Not to say they will have labs and model from other countries, but very difficult they will stay consistently on top. We can have rising stars from different countries. In fact, that would be possibly my prediction if you benchmark. We're going to touch that. But overall, as an ecosystem of AI and related, US is still very much advanced compared to the rest. Possibly China could compete. But we'll see what happens in the next future stages. Although I just wanted to clarify on that when I say that, at least from the money spent, is clear that the dominant of the US, that does not mean that with limited budget now you can have decent specialized company in the application layer or decent specialized models, that are very good in specific benchmark. This is still very possible, and I'm expecting that few sort of niche company in specific market can be competitive even if not based in the US or China. Labo sort and being born in 25 and 26, by the way. Of course, you can argue that Black Forest or Mr. already, yes, sure, but they started a little bit before, yeah? So what I'm trying to say is, with a limited budget, not in US, not in China, you can still do a company in the application layer or certain niche specific model that is competitive with the best in world. Talking about that later. Labor shortages, yes, regardless of how many people think about AI AI redundancy, what redundancy due to the AI, there are still institutions that expect shortages in certain sectors. As I said before, healthcare is one, manufacturing is one, and possibly hospitality is one. The reason is simple. If again, this is related also to the trend, the secular trend of aging. Yes, so we have many people that are retired or close to retire now, and the replacement is not as equal, right? So even for that reason, it is expected that if before there were free workers, just due to aging of the population, now there are less kids, so there are less people to work. And even for that reason, at least in the long term, you should expect that AI, instead of doing redundancy, is just uh, replacing the workforce gap due to aging. Yeah, so or the workforce gap due to lack of children. Yeah, therefore that's another additional reason why I say multiple times with different arguments. This is one. I'm not thinking AI as a mass redundancy tool. If you have less kids and you still need workers, the best AI can do is not exacerbating the so that you should have because of the lack of kids. It's in another way. There is still slightly, compared especially to the year before, a shortage of overall in US of employment. I mean by that, if you look at the data for BLS, in December 25, there were approximately 0.9, 0.95 job openings for any unemployed person. So basically, there is quasi parity ratio between unemployed and work not fulfilled. But nevertheless, there are acute shortages in certain sectors. As I said before, healthcare is the main one, but there are others. You still feel others like 42% or unfulfilled in US manufacturing, possibly more. Again, remember the localization of workforce, the CHIP Act, that kind of force company to build factory in US, so far, so on. Okay, now this is important. Is actually there are studies that by 2030 we have more than 85 million jobs that could be unfilled globe-wide, and this is I sat in Conferry, but WEF, World Economic Forum, kind of predict the same. So basically, I don't remember it's 2030 or 2035, but we will have, I possibly have in another slide, rather than have redundancies, we have skill mismatch. So basically what it means is, yes, for sure, certain job will not exist in the same form as today, but there will be many new job and many people will struggle to be retrained rather than, hence there will be as ridiculous as it sounds, there will be many unfulfilled job with many more unemployed because they lack the capability or whatever, they're trying to be reskilling in new necessary jobs rather than just have AI redundancy due to the AI because we are not needed anymore. We will be still needed in different job, but the challenge will be to reskill a good portion of the population to the new job. That will be the difficulty. They say trend catalyst 9, public spending and GDP ratio. There's not much to say to that. This is starting to be close to a secular trend rather than a catalyst trend, but never mind. Still is considered as a catalyst trend. Well, due to political reason, world polarization, as I call it, as a secular trend, definitely the countries are not diminishing their spending. Aging population, so you need to spend more in welfare. There is more uncertainty, so definitely we observe more spending in the military budget, things like that. I think the US alone military budget is about $1 trillion. Yeah, it's about $1 trillion. I was remembering correctly. Still growing, definitely not diminishing. And China as well is increasing. In the last decade, increased by 50%. Not too little. And again, although we don't expect inflation to be out of control, possibly 2-3%, having a large debt to GDP ratio also means that the ability to support the population with reskilling or whatever else cannot increase too much unless we find a way to produce more with less, which is exactly what I do, produce more with less. That's one of the last trend catalysts, virtualization and automation of living. As I say, at least one time before, there is a new tendency for new generation to have online experiencing, social next or whatever online rather than physical interaction. 40% of Gen Z socialize more in video game than offline, and therefore there are industries related to that are growing more than the hospitality industry, for example. One is definitely the gaming industry. So the 70% of millennial, my generation, or 81% of Gen Z consumers play video game. Yeah, the vast majority of newer generation play video games. And as I say, again, this is I said before, now we have comparable salaries between top video game players, yeah, and football like Premier League or La Liga football player, yeah, millionaires in both sides. Although one actually does something with his body and the other move a keyboards in a way. Yeah, both athletes, very different athletes. One keyboards again, the other actually uses body. I can go on and on that, but in the interest of time already almost 7:30, I will move on with that, but the tendencies is clear. There is a virtualization and automation of living. The last thing I want to mention from here is that the more we are getting used to use devices, even more so with AI, there are studies that observe a decrease in cognitive abilities. Again, more even so with AI, the more you use AI, the less you use your brain. The less you use your brain, you basically use your cognitive abilities. Yeah, that's quite predictable, but it's important to understand there is a downside to have such a large dependency on virtual environment or virtual living. Okay. The last, I believe this is the last, yes. The last trend, the trend catalyst 11, freelancer or gig economy. This is something I didn't include last year, but thought was very important to include this year. It's basically we are moving in a world in which what is called in a positive way a flexibility of employment, or the way around, if you like, the less certainty or regulation of employment create what is called the gig economy of freelancer. You Deliveroo, the Uber drivers, but also the freelancer on Fiverr for websites, things like that, Upwork, things like that. Yeah, and this is now growing approximately 3 times faster than the traditional workforce. Is a trend. Again, it can be very contrary to a secular trend. This is a catalyst trend. So I believe that the politics or a new election of president or policy can intervene drastically on that, but I don't see that's changing drastically, as in not growing. Definitely is a fact to consider. The online gig force workers now are basically 12% of the total online workforce. This is a World Bank, statistics. And the US actually is the largest market for freelancer. We almost 36% of the national workforce. So it's more than, so the total online workforce for the world is 12%. The total US national workforce of freelancers 30%, 36% of the total US workforce. India is the fastest growing gig economies, 21% CGR. Argentina and Brazil strictly follow. As you can see, Argentina less so, but definitely Brazil and India are also one of the largest economy in terms of outsourcing or natural process outsourcing countries, which obviously it makes sense. They're also the fastest growing workforce of freelancer, as is knowledge process outsourcing is usually done by, yes, in outsourced country like India or Brazil, but also the condition of employment, the contract of employment, very, in a way, flexible with less guarantees or less rights is the way it is. And I do think that is going to increase regardless with AI, but this is possibly, I'm going to talk about that later. That's why there is a trend. Suffice to say that the trend of increasing of the workforce in a flexible and with less right way is definitely increasing. Definitely increasing more than any other type of workforce. Okay. Now, with that, I finished with all the analysis of the AI advancement. Then I touch on the secular trend, and then again I touch on the catalyst trend. Once again, before I get into the predictions, I want to remind you why I'm doing that, because now I'm about to talk about the predictions, and the predictions is, any prediction is a result of what I call secular trends. Again, trend that happen for 10 years or more, very difficult to move them, aging. No country or government can actually make a law or an incentive that can move the aging trend. Catalyst trend, very politically and policy prone, AI governance, for example. And now I'm going to talk about the contingent event, specific event that may trigger what I call the trend prediction for the next year. Yeah. So that's the way I reason about any prediction I'm going to make here. Okay. With that, let's start with the prediction. We are 2.5 hours. Let's see how long it will take to do the prediction. I will reckon 1.5 hours, maybe 1 hour. Let's see. Come back to the predictions. What is that? Let me check if okay. Let me check if there is any question. No, there is no question for me. I expected that. And let's move on until my drinking a little bit of water. Let me just drink a little bit of water in the meantime. Again, we are gonna touch now the prediction, and with that, we have analyzed all the state of the art report for this year. Right. So, first trend prediction: AI capital, energy, and economy. Events. Now, there are many on that, but one of the most important one is, Nvidia announced a new GPU platform. They should come later this year, I believe Q3, so around September, if production go according to the plan. It's called Nvidia and Rubin, which is expected to be 2x more powerful and also obviously more energy consuming than the previous generation. And it can output 10 more tokens. Basically, the inference of this new GPU Rubin is way better than the inference performance of the current one. But here's the crucial things. It does not require energy intelligence chiller system to run because it's been designed to work with water, still water liquid base, but up to 45 degrees. Yeah. That means that what we heard today about the cooling systems, the energy consumption of the cooling. By the way, if I'm not mistaken, in a data center today, around 8% to 10% of the energy consumption of a data center is due to the cooling system. Yeah. So using this new Rubin GPU, out of the bath, you consume less, 8 to 10% compared to the previous generation. Of course, you may consume more because there is more density in power, but definitely you have a reduction on consumption on that. On top of that, when you design the rack and the floor of the rack, you now don't need the chillers anymore, which are very heavy machineries, and you can design in a much lighter way the full data center. Therefore, the data center construction itself, since the floor do not need to support heavy chillers machineries, they can be done faster and more cheaply, or at least cheaper than they're doing now. As again, the chillers are not required anymore due to the new Nvidia Rubin, and there are spare reduction in cost around the running of the data centers and the actual construction of it. Second, training the model is becoming more affordable. To give an example, now fine-tuning with different model, again, if you remember before, the cost per inference or even localization of model make a data set, sorry, fine-tuning the model, which basically is specializing a model to your own need. That's what fine-tuning means. You have a specific data set or a specific task. You train a large model to do the specific task well. You start now $500. So it's becoming very convenient to do fine-tuning. Yeah, even on large models. Yeah, the costs are in other words, the costs are decreasing. The consumption, the energy consumption, everything is decreasing. Now, large and reasoning model are now energy draining, assuming I say 1,000 words. There is now a distinction between energy consumption of normal modern reasoning model, what is called the chain of thought. If you're using AI, depending on the interface you're using, for example, now I'm using Perplexity, but I'm pretty sure, in fact, Google, etc., they have the same interface. So if you toggle the model you're using, you can toggle on and off what is called thinking, which is basically the chain of thought reasoning. That the part that consume more compute and energy, etc. Right? So you have twofold here. The energy required and the cost required for models with not thinking, not chain of thought, is decreasing rapidly. So they're becoming really efficient. What is now consuming a lot is the reasoning part. The longer is the reasoning, the more you're consuming, basically. To the point that the University of Rhode Island, I love it. If you click at the link, you go in a UX interface that make you change different model, make you see how much each model consume, but you will see that a reasoning model consume 10 to 30 times more than a non-reasoning model. In other words, we are becoming very, with today's technology, by the way, and it will be even more so in the future. I just want to clarify that. Remember the research I talked to you now 2 hours ago. Because the model are becoming more efficient, there is localization, fast on, so smaller, less energy consumption for the model itself with different solutions, including diffusion, blah blah. Just listen again what I said before. What is important though is to remember that what is now the limiting factor for energy consumption is the thinking. The longer is the thinking, again, if you do your own interface, you will see a button you could toggle on and off thinking. That is what costs money and energy. The rest, we are getting very, very efficient with that. That's what is important to remember. Equally important, and now I'm starting a new paper, which I believe is from Nvidia at George Tech University. Yeah. I quote them as the performance small medium model, which basically means model below 150 billion parameters. That's what is called roughly the threshold of a medium model, is now sufficient enough for many tasks as improving. So Nvidia, the one that produced the chip for large models, basically, and training very, very large model, is aware and published research saying that if you do use small or medium model and local models, which means model they don't need their GPU they are selling most of the times. It's an exaggeration, but just to bring the point. Nvidia itself, the one that produce chips that are used to train the very, very large model, knows that now, increasing more so, there will be small model, they will not require the super expensive cluster of GPU. They will be sufficient enough for most tasks. Yeah. Also, local model are now 5.3 times more efficient than cloud-based model for most tasks. Obviously, they consume less energy. Yes, if a model is small enough to fit in a consumer hardware, definitely is going to consume less energy. There is no such a energy density requirement for a consumer laptop. Therefore, so that was kind of obvious, but it's good to explicitly say that. Yeah. So this is another. So you see that most of the thing, apart from the thinking, all the rest of the element touching so far go to the same direction: reduction of energy consumption. Everything from not needing of the chillers, now models that are sufficient around most tasks and consume less energy. Training the model now costs less. Inference of model now costs less unless you want the thinking part, which may not necessary. So everything goes into the direction of energy requirement while keeping while is less, while unless you want the thinking part is way less important. Okay. Beyond China and US, countries are planning ambitious data centers. As I said before, there is a large imbalance in data center in the world. About 3,000 or 4,000, depend on which statistic you follow, are in US. The rest, the closer one is 500 in Germany. About the same in US, in China and UK. But that not to say there are large data centers in construction at the moment. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Japan, for example. But as a key, I should highlight that most of the data centers, due to the grid construction, they will have their own power plant. Okay, yeah. So the new data center and then construction of them requires them to produce their own energy to provide that. But again, as I said before, possibly yes, there will be energy density increasing the rack, but there are a lot of efficiency that you can have due to possibly lack of cooling or chillers or things like that. Okay, also to mention that. Another important part, especially on the economy and the investment on this data center, that unfortunately the GPU depreciation by the books, as in by accounting, let's say CoWave or alike, is written a depreciation between 5 or 6 years. However, in practice, due to the massive race between Nvidia and new players, obviously AMD, but also there are others I will mention in a second, is the actual lifespan is expected to be 2-3 years. That means a crunch in terms of accountancy, and this needs to be solved. As I already mentioned, by the way, in the 2025 report, due to, again, the increasing differently and spending of data centers, energy demand of data centers is becoming more and more viable to build data center in space. If you remember last year, I believe we mentioned Lumen Orbit. This year, many more companies, even large companies like SpaceX and Google, are coming to space. Space data center is becoming a interesting subject, again, due to the political situation, the difficulty to build data centers and the legal requirement, the energy requirement, etc. That's become very, very possible. Again, just to remind why it is in space, basically you are direct sun, so the solar panel become way more efficient than is in on Earth, because the atmosphere reduce the efficiency, I believe 30% of any solar panel. Obviously in space there is less requirement of cooling or things like that. It's cold down there, so that there is a problem of eating. This that the major advantage to do that. And there is obviously no problem of regulation, as in, as long as you put it there, is the only problem is the latency and the connection to the ground. But as long as you can solve that in a fair amount, and legislation, basically there is a convention now that whatever, if the company is registered, let's say Lumen Orbit, which is I believe is a company registered in US, if they launch the data centers, so by definition, data center is circling the orbit. So it's not staying in any specific country, right? It's in the orbit, it's not on Earth. But since the company owned that data center, or this orbital data center is registered in US, that data center is US regulated. Yeah. It needs to follow all the regulation for processing in US, any regulation in US. New type of AI labs raised significant funds. Again, as I mentioned in the VC trend, catalyst trend, there are at least two, but no more than two, I would say. SSSI and Thinking Machine, which are basically called startups. It's a bit ridiculous when the first funding round is more than $1 billion, but they are considered startups. They are basically founded by people exiting from already existing big lab like OpenAI or Meta, things like that. But these are the only two that I believe they can contest or compete with already established lab or foundation model companies. Yeah. Based on that, I get to the predictions. Now, the first prediction is due to the lower buying training small model, early VC fund will be about 30%, and focusing on AI application, no foundation infrastructure, etc. So you remember that there was kind of a split between the money that goes to each stage of investing, from pre-seed or early stage seed to Series A, Series B to later stage funding. Yeah. What I'm saying with that is, sure, by the way, it's not written here, but it's written in the second prediction actually. So AI fund consolidation mega round will continue, but will slow down or flat compared to 2026. So I'm expecting that there will be still concentration, but they're not expecting new players to come to the race for foundation model. The shortlisted player already there. Actually, there are two new ones, SSI, Thinking Machine, but just because there are people exited from OpenAI, things like that, otherwise it would not be possible. But apart from that, due to the fact that, again, as you can see, now it's possible to train competitive model, but in specific task, have robotics, and the energy requirement for that is not massive. Even Nvidia realized that. Again, remember, this is a paper for Nvidia. I like here. Yeah, this is a paper for Nvidia. They say performance is small, medium AI models, which basically mean model that can fit in local hardware. Yeah, and now sufficient for many tasks. Yeah, and they are obviously more efficient, energy efficient. That means it's now possible to, with a limited budget, to compete and do specific application locally, yeah, or do more AI application, and not relying only on the API of big players, yeah. Therefore, as early investors, they will be more inclined to spend money on small players that now can compete with limited budget to do an application that was not possible before. Therefore, I'm saying that compared to the past, we have a resurgence of early VC investment into early stages. Before it was not possible because it was not clear if small player could compete with the larger model, at least in niche industries. It was not clear if it's possible. Now it's clear it's possible. Robotic will continue to rise again. That will come. It's coming because of, if you remember what I say about the AI advancement in 2025, the localization of model. There is no more localized model than a robot, right? By definition, a robot is an hardware with a local model installed on that doesn't drain the battery in 2 minutes. That's by definition. Since now research has indication it is possible, definitely it's going to rise. I predict it will be at least 50 billion invested in robotic alone. Yeah. Due to the improvement of cooling, NAMBI issues demand pressure, retrofitting data center will be as common as new data center build. So if you remember what I say now in the event, yeah, chillers not defined, but however, there also in the catalyst trend, there are drawback or regulatory issues. That's the NAMBI not in my space, basically, not my environment. They don't want the data center for environmental issues. There is a grid that cannot cope with that. In any case, the legal procedure is very slow, things like that. And combined to the fact that now the new GPUs are efficient enough and not requiring cooling, now it's easier to retrofit a data center. Yeah. When I say a data center, imagine a data center for cloud hosting, things like that. These data centers usually are CPU data centers. They may have liquid cooling, but not as intensive as the GPU. At least wasn't things today. Since now GPU can require less cooling, now it's easier to take an older data center and retrofit it, if provided that the new GPU, like Nvidia Rubin, would not require massive cooling, things like that. It wasn't possible to retrofit. Well, it's still possible. There are companies that are doing a section of the data. So what happened today? Certain data center, all data center, retrofit a section of it, but just a section with new GPU cluster, things like that. They cannot do the full thing because the full data center with the current version of the GPU again require a lot of cooling, therefore more than a CPU. Therefore, they need to restructure all the floors to sustain the weight of the massive chillers, the cable, and things like that. This requirement is becoming less important. Again, not chillers, things like that. Therefore, now it's becoming a bit better to retrofit all the data center. At the same time, given the back, the delay on legal procedure, energy grid, etc., to connect the new data center that continue, it become even more favorable to retrofit a old one. That's the rationality with this prediction. Retrofitting become as common as building new data center because of technical improvement, less cooling necessary or chiller necessary, combined with delaying on new data center and grid stuff like that. While the original existing are already connected to the grid, yes, you need to change something, but you can still do it now. Yeah. Now, data center energy demand will be under control due to bring your own electricity and efficient improvement. However, the grid will still be under pressure. Again, the grid is the worldwide problem of energy, not the actual energy production. At least not in all jurisdictions. Definitely not in Europe. So I'm expecting actually data center energy worldwide, possibly in US, but even there, we bring your own energy, efficiency improvement, I think it will be under control. Even the model now require less. So unless you put already established data center, you just switch to the latest density model. But even if you put, let's say a data center just finished last year. First of all, if it's finished last year, is already, what I mean is finished, is in connected to the grid, is in production, is live. Yeah. So basically, possibly we'll have Nvidia Hopper, let's say, or the version after that, Blackwell. They may have Blackwell, sorry. Now, first of all, it's very unlikely due to the depreciation and things like that, they will switch immediately to Rubin because it will be 2 years depreciation, which is, remember, the accountancy is 2-3 years depreciation real life, while the depreciation in the accountancy, in the account, is 6 years. So if they do that, because the 2-3 years, their plan is on a new Rubin, there will be a lot of significant efficiency on less consumption due to the cooling. They may have more density. They probably have a bit more energy density, but also the requirement on energy will be less in terms of the new model, unless you use constant thinking, will be less. So even in that case, it needs to be seen. And this is a worst scenario. I'm talking about a data center that came online in production last year and decide after 2 years straight on the problem of the accountancy, GDP representation, and decide to move to newest generation, which in which case will be Rubin. Even in that case, it's debatable it will create a crash in the energy grid. It may, but as you can see, it's an extreme case. I'm talking about newest data center just converted to the newest GPU version. So no, I don't expect massive crash, at least not this year, of energy grid or consumption due to energy consumption of the data center. However, the problem of the grid will definitely persist. An orbital object is under the law or the country where the owner is incorporated. A country will propose a law designed for space data center to incentivize a regulated matter. Again, as I say, there is inside possible delay or data center construction, legal issues, permission, whatever else, that in turn create more facility to both retrofitting, as I did a prediction, and space, as I say in that part, space data center is now a sector, is a viable sector for all these reasons. At the same time, that also means there is a necessity to possibly regulate the matter, which I will not be surprised if certain countries will exploit the situation to create favorable regulation that allow them to incorporate the company within whatever the country is, incentivize company to come in whatever the country is to have data center space sector in that country. It's a new field. I would not be surprised if certain country will try to attract space data center sector with specific regulation. And that's basically what I'm predicting. There will be specific regulation will come in that country in terms of less taxation or possibly more permission of processing certain data, whatever that is. There will be at least one new cloud company or GPU data center with impairment issue due to GPU depreciation, and chip manufacturer will come to rescue. Circular deal. Now, we already experienced, I didn't say that before, but we already experienced a lot of circular deals in the last year, really. Circular deals basically means, I don't know, Microsoft, they invest on OpenAI. If OpenAI buy a certain amount of Azure services, Nvidia invests in another startup company. If they buy the new version of the Nvidia chips and things like that, Now, that definitely is going to continue to the point that if you remember what I said before, I say already quite a few times, the GPU depreciation is 5 to 6 years in the books, in the accounts. However, this lifespan is possibly 2-3 years because they're improving that fast. Therefore, the only way that the gain can continue is some of these neo cloud. I'm not mentioning names just because I don't know which one is more under risk. If they have any impairment or issue, a large chip manufacturer, not necessarily Nvidia, by the way, it could be NV, Broadcom, for example, or others, they will do a deal with them, provided that they will agree to buy with the new money or whatever, the new chip from this manufacturer. That's what I'm saying. Basically, is another way to say that circular deals are just at the beginning, but I'm expecting circular specific due to this issue, due to this difference between accounting depreciation and actual real depreciation of GPU. Next, AI hardware. I have 2 pages of event here. Let me check if there is any question on that. Possibly not. And I move on with that. Okay, so right, so AI hardware. Now, I already touched on GPU, but from an economical point of view. Now I'm gonna touch the GPU from a purely technical specification point of view. Yeah. First of all, just a word on the size of this company compared to the market. I find it, how would I say, strange that the GPU market, if you look at Precedence Research, for example, which is a very established research company, put a price tag of the GPU total market of 136 billion USD, and the whole semiconductor, which is not necessarily only GPU, semiconductor can be CPU, specific chips for the whatever that is, semiconductors, optics, that semiconductors is 627 billion USD. Yeah. Now, if you look at the revenue of Nvidia, Nvidia has a revenue of 130 billion, yeah, and AMD a 34 billion, yeah, and a market cap of 5 trillion compared to 42 billion. So you combine the revenue, you basically 100% of the revenue on Nvidia compared to the GPU market cap, and sorry, the market, no, the revenue of Nvidia is directly comparable with the GPU market, which is sounds alright, which is a dominant player. However, the market cap is way larger than that. Yeah, in fact, it's way larger than the semiconductor industry as a whole. Now, you can have 2 ways here. Either the industry is semiconductor industry in general is a little bit undervalued, yeah, or the company itself, AMD, Nvidia, are a bit overvalued. I have no idea which one way to do it, but one of the 2 industries seems off for some reasons. Yeah, this is just worth mentioning it. Okay, Nvidia chips were overbooked, which means basically they sold all the chip they could produce and possibly more for the next few years. And that also, though, as I mentioned before, that includes circular deals. Yeah. So basically, you find Nvidia finance or give money to a company to buy its own chip return. And MD, as I possibly say in the prediction, if you remember the prediction 2025, got order for 50,000 Oracle GPU. This is actually in Q4 2025, and other deals like OpenAI, directly the government of Saudi Arabia for 1 billion, and Google started selling its own TPUs. Just to mention, by the way, there was a news about, there was an kind of a breaking news, I believe it was September or whatever it was, that Google had its own processing unit, tensor processing unit, which is a version, specialized version of GPU. Really, it wasn't new. Whoever is following this report is following that for at least the last year. You see that we mentioned it wasn't something new. That Google and others mentioned, I believe Amazon Trainium, for example, they are building their own GPUs. Just a reminder of what we said last year. So it wasn't a breaking news, something new that nobody knew. Due to the fact that the bottom line of Nvidia is close to 80% or more think it's 90, don't remember, let's say between 80 and 90% margin. That's the margin Nvidia make on selling its GPU. It make perfect sense. That's what we say. You can look at the same state of AI video of the last year. It makes perfect sense for a company like Google or even Amazon to build their own chip without even selling it, even if they spend the same 90% just to their own chip. Yeah, they are still 10% cheaper than buying Nvidia. Yeah. On top of that, they have all the experience in house. So it makes perfect sense for a large company like that to spend billions in developing their own CPU, given the large margin that now GPU Nvidia demand. Yeah. So no, it shouldn't be a surprise. It definitely shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that followed this report for the last year for sure. Yeah, just to mention that. So at the moment, AMD has about 8% market share on discrete GPU. So you remember, GPU for consumer, as in laptop or desktop for consumer, which basically are for video game or for the people that like it for crypto mining. Um, it is very different of the cluster. Yeah, the configuration is different. The structure is different. Just to mention that. Yeah. That said, AMD has still about 8% of market share on discrete GPUs as today, and 10% on data center. Depends on the configuration, etc. Today, yeah. Small models, again, small model means model or 150 billion parameter or less, yeah, are becoming sufficiently powerful for more stack. Again, I'm citing the paper I say for the other prediction, okay? The AI and capital and energy prediction just before that. It's so important. It's good to remember. There are now small models that fit in consumer hardware, and they're not as consumed in terms of electricity and things like that, that can perform many tasks. Yeah. Neo cloud versus local. Constant improvement of GPUs infrastructure is pushing company to hire instead of buying. Yeah. Uh, why the new cloud are such a thing is, first of all, you need to remember that somehow someone has to live with the impairments. Again, the depreciation I was talking before, right? This is the risk. GPU depreciation 5 to 6 years and operating lifetime 2-3 years. Yeah. The the very fact that this risk exists of actual depreciation compared to accounting depreciation make the neo cloud so relevant, because a company doesn't want to risk to buy a lot of GPU, then being relevant, keep the as long as they can negotiate a good deal with the new cloud, for them is more convenient. However, if the deal is too convenient for the client of the neo cloud, the and the GPU keep improving too much, neo cloud are close to zero margin or loss money making company. So this is a delicate balance, but this delicate balance make favorable for company as long as they can have a good deal from the neo cloud to make the cloud for the moment relevant. All it matters for a company that doesn't want to risk to be have obsolete technology very soon because the GPU improves too fast is to have a good deal with a neo cloud. Now, obviously, that means that the neo cloud have the risk. The company do not have the risk. The neo cloud have the risk. At the same time, this is happening. There are companies like HP, specifically HP Enterprise, HPE, Asus, Apple. They are now building both a platform, software platform, and little boxes, just little hardware that can train or do AI inference local and small hardwares. So these are the two trends to take on at the moment. Yeah, neocloud are still relevant due to the company don't want to invest in a potentially and take the risk of potentially obsolete GPUs. At the same time, there's a tendency for other major hardware equipment like HP, Asus, or Apple to do a combine. This is the key combine. You need a local hour, but with a platform. The platform they make it easier to train a local model. Yeah. Okay. Other aspect. This is just overview of the hardware market. Now, let's talk about specific on a bit of technicalities of the new chip coming. Again, Rubin, the new platform of Nvidia. I already said about the chilling multiple times in the economy slide before, but what is important now that by mid 2026 it will be 5 faster in inference and 3.5 faster in training compared to the current Blackwell GPU that is currently sold today. Yeah. Now, the energy efficiently in another way, in an energy efficiency to be 10%, not 10%, 10 times faster, 10 times better than the energy efficiency of the current Blackwell GPU at 4 times in training. Yeah, about 4 times in training. Especially, and there's a key here for sparse AI model. You may remember that I mentioned that one of the key novelty, if you like, of in the AI advancement stage of sparse AI model of Quen family, Quen free family, I believe. Yeah. These kind of families of sparse AI, which basically mean model with very little active parameters. Very little active parameter means less somehow energy required. The denser there is, the more energy requirement. Yeah. It's a brutal estimation just to make you understand. Since they are very sparse AI model, therefore that's why they can infer more. If you design a chip with that in mind, with little activation or sparse activation, then you can have more efficiency, both in training and inference. I hope it's clear. So when they design a chip, and by the way, there are startups that are specialized only on transformers, just to mention that. GPU startup is specialized only on transformers. That means if you go out of transformer architecture, the architecture doesn't work too well. Yeah. But in this case, they work on sparse models. Yeah. The more it's sparse, the more this new architecture of Rubin is more efficient. To be honest, I need to clarify they will be efficient anyway, because if a model is sparse, by definition, activate little number of parameters, and is more efficient in any case. Okay, but it's designed to incentivize the efficiency of that. Nvidia versus basically the closest competitor, if you call closest someone that has 10% against 90% of the market, but Intel. Now, in terms of pure performance, yeah, very similar. I mean, by the new Rubin mid 26 and the new MI 450 by AMD, in terms of crude performance, is similar. Memory bandwidth around. By the way, the reason why memory bandwidth is important is because within a cluster, this GPU needs to communicate information back and forth among each other. The faster you train or the faster you have inference, in certain cases, depending on the configuration, is different between training and inference. But roughly speaking, the reason why this number, the memory bandwidth, is so important because when you create a cluster, these GPUs need to communicate very fast. By the way, as I've written here, Vera Rubin, which is the architecture one, the main architecture one, has 72 GPU, which basically means each GPU communicate with each other with about a bandwidth of 20 terabyte per second. Yeah. And the total graphic power, again, for both MI 450 and Nvidia Rubin, is between 2 and 2.5, 2.3, 2.5 kilowatt. Compute is similar, 40 to 50 petaflops. Nvidia beat Nvidia on memory a bit, but also beyond performance, the new Nvidia Rubin require less cooling, as I say multiple times before. Intel seriously lagging. The best chip, I believe, is 2 generation below. So 2 generation now will be the upper generation. Yeah, the Gaudi 3. Yeah, there we go. It's written here. So we're going from memory. I wrote it even here. Upper is, which is 2 generation ago from Nvidia, is competitive to the Intel Gaudi 3. Now, it's important to mention why Nvidia is still an advantage. Yeah, one of the main reasons why Nvidia is still the larger player, it will continue to do so. I'm going to the prediction in a few minutes now, is because the usability of its software. Again, you need to remember that it's not just a piece of hardware that is very performant, but you need to have a software tool that easy to use for training or inference purposes. Basically, you can use it easily. Yeah. It's the same reason, by the way, and that's important just to mention that. Remember when I talk about the Apple HP Oasis, they sell you as a one GPU in a box, but equally important, they sell you a platform with that. Yeah. The platform is what make the training or the inference of the basically they allow you to load in the data, load in the model, and touch a few buttons and or few script, and you train the model. Yeah, or you put the model quote in an API mode for inference. Yeah, you need kind of a platform to do that. Yes, you still need configuration. Yes, you still need to code, but it's easier enough to do it. Yeah, that's what is important to say for the local hardware company. It's not just designing an hardware easy to transport local, but it's also a light platform that allow local implementation. Important to say that. The same way, Nvidia has an advantage against other chip manufacturer because they have a very usable code called CUDA. Yeah. Now, obviously, the other like MD, there is ROCm, have it, but it's way behind CUDA. Now, here's what's happening though. MD is fast improving, and equally at the same time, there are, I mentioned two, by the way, but the other day I see others. There are many others. Musa or Zluda. As you can see, the name kind of resembles what CUDA is because they are trying to port, taking the software from CUDA and bring it to other chip. So basically taking the advantage of Nvidia, which is basically the software, try to make that work for also MD chip or other chips. Yeah. Equally important, as I said before, equally important, as I said before, for quantum computing, talking about that's what I was mentioned before. If you remember, I mentioned during the AI advancement that there is a potential for quantum computing to work very well with AI. I mentioned the paper before. And kind of Nvidia going the same direction because it's announcing that there is as infrastructure, well, it's kind of a software infrastructure and VQ-Link to combine GPU with quantum processor. You can rewatch this live when I talk about quantum plus AI and why that could be a very good thing, a very good combination. Now, if you see what Nvidia is doing, is going directly in that direction from a hardware perspective, trying to combine GPU with quantum processors. Yeah, this is also another contingent event to consider. Now, in terms of chip manufacturing, what the other are doing beyond the three Nvidia, AMD, and Intel, XAI and Meta, as far as we know, they are in developing their own chips. AWS Tranium are now cost effective, especially for inference, yeah, with Nvidia racks. The Nvidia TPU version 7 is actually on par with Blackwell. And again, depending on the benchmark, if you see, it is even possibly a bit more efficient with specific architecture transformer. As I said before, when you know and we fix a specific architecture, like the transformer architecture, the attention-based architecture, then you can, instead of a design of a chip that can work in different architecture, you can design a chip that works very, very well on that, which means it's more efficient just for that architecture. The downside of that, and the risk, if you like, of that is the moment, which I expect is kind of very, very possible, as I say in the research, or even last year research when I mentioned mixer architecture, or using today terminology, hybrid architecture. Basically, if, well, to me, there is no if, but when we move away from the transformer architecture, if your chip is designed just for that, you becoming fast irrelevant or less relevant. Yeah. So that's the trade-off you do. You're more efficient with just specific software architecture, but then the architecture of the software change, or the transforming basically a hybrid of transform plus diffusion. That's the easiest way to say. Then not necessarily basically you lose all the performance advantage you were designed just for transformers. Chinese chips. Top chips still for Huawei, which are on par again if you choose generation away, the upper 100 or 200, depends on what you consider. There are also to consider other options like Mutren, Byron, or Cambricon. They are all, if you see especially the stock prices, they all shoot up a lot. And the reason is in assets on Nvidia or AMD sales, which by the way is not exactly true because if I remember correctly, I saw some article, I can't verify that, so didn't put in the report, but there are ways to buy with a third intermediary, basically a third country in China, the best chips. They cannot buy, obviously they cannot buy too many, but they buy with 100% markup, basically double the price we pay for them. Nevertheless, most of the operators decide not to have that markup, but go the exact opposite way, buying a lot of very, very cheap chips. And with that, you expect, if you look at the stock price of this company, some of them, I believe Cambricon is a public company, they are rising. It's important to say that what I've seen around, especially for Chinese player, they now, knowing that they kind of lost the battle for these kind of chips, transformer, diffusion, attention things, they're trying now to see if they can invest and have a future competitive advantage like they did with the battery. It's 20 years and solar panel. Basically, it's 20 years that China invest on the industry of solar panel and batteries. Hence, they are dominant. All the world relies on this. Therefore, they're trying, in my judgment, let's see if they continue, but as far as I can see today, they have a on par, if not competitive advantage in optical photonics connection. So at the moment, there are electrical cables between the GPUs and the data center, things like that. If this connection become, instead of basically copper or whatever that is, with optical photonic connection, and they are advanced that, they can become again competitive with that specific part of a data center, the specific part of a rack of a cluster infrastructure, for example. A startup, there are many, by the way, that design different chips, by the way. Again, there is another one, I don't think it's recursive, but no, it's definitely not recursive. They design a chip. Did I put it there? No. specific for transformer. That means, as I think, transformer architecture will change, this become irrelevant. But hey, so it's life. That said, I mentioned this startup are recursive because at the moment in time, if you want to design Nvidia, for example, by the way, Nvidia is a cheap designer. It's not a cheap producer. To put it another way, what in the output on Nvidia is a file or softwares or whatever, and then these files and instruction, etc., they is the input, is their output literally, and is the input of TNC, the fab, the Taiwan Semiconductor factory. They take this file, they work with NVIDIA, they produce this chip from the wafer and machine from SML, things like that. Yeah. So, however, to design each generation of chip, it takes about 2-3 years for NVIDIA today. Now, this startup, Recursive, raising money because they think they found a way to design a chip not in 2-3 years, but in few weeks. It's like just in time fashion. You know that now, well, I don't know back in the day, but for sure now H&M fashion, they have a 2-3 weeks turnaround from the moment they design a piece of clothes to the moment they show in the showrooms or in the stores around the 2-3 weeks. They basically want to do a just-in-time kind of fashion designer for chips instead of clothes, just to put it that way. I thought that was very interesting, very ambitious. Not sure it goes, but definitely there is a trend of somehow, somewhere, find an angle in which you can displace Nvidia. Yeah. Now, given 2-3 years is the current time, if you find a new way in which instead of 2-3 years is 1 year, so even that is more than 50% of the time, they still be very valuable. And there is a new way for new player to come if you have faster design cycle. Obviously, with fast design cycle, this is just speculation, by the way, but just in here, if that is become, if any news of this startup come this year that process is actually working, imagine what happened with the precision of GPU, for example. it, it goes to quickly from 2-3 years actual to 1 year of whatever, right? So you need to think about that. It's not, in fact, it's not, if you remember, it's not a coincidence then today that the design cycle for us chip Nvidia AMD is 2-3 years. Guess what? The actual operative lifespan of a GPU is 2-3 years, because the moment they redesign one is the same time with the operative lifespan the old one, things like that, right? If you do for whatever reason that becomes true, but even if it was sub 1 year instead of few weeks, there will be immediate consequences on the market and the way the market price everything here, right? With a significant correction, let's put it that way, of the pricing of certain company at very least. I try to be, gentle to stuff eventually, but you can see yourself, whoever is listening to this, right? But nevertheless, I'm sure you understand why it's important to at least mention there are ways in which you can really display certain companies. Okay. Again, next generation inference only. This was quite of a news, I would say. Nvidia CPX. Now, as I say before, the AMD is catching up somehow. Both hardware more or less there. Certain makes it even a bit better, certain a little bit worse, but more or less the new GPU for AMD for 50 compared to Rubin roughly will be almost there. It's not there in terms of software, CUDA, but there are ways to port the CUDA software for other manufacturer like AMD, and therefore that can be sort of solved. What the new game for Nvidia though, one is robotics, and I'll come to that in a second. And the other though is the Nvidia announced a chip that disaggregated phase of inference. Not gonna talk about the two phases of inference, prefill of the decoding, but that means in practice that the new Nvidia CPX, which by the way is a GPU chip that is very how would I say, integrating in their own Vera cluster, in the Vera cluster. So basically, as I said before, NVIDIA Rumi R200, apart from having more performance, has also been designed to work in a cluster, Vera Rubin NVL72 with 72 GPU. And the new NVIDIA CPX is an efficient inference chip. Yeah. And this efficient inference chip is obviously designed to work somehow substituting some, not all of them, but some of these 72 GPUs in the Vera Rubin cluster, okay? But specific for inference, because they find a way to, from a hardware perspective, to make pre-filled economy more efficient. I'm not going to talk about that, but the important bit is NVIDIA understand now there is a localization trend model. Remember, there now small model. Even Nvidia itself did a paper that now local model are sufficient enough for enough task. There are already player like HP, Apple. They do small GPU only boxes with their own framework to do inference and local time, etc., etc. So, and the training of GPU, the training AI model is now no more than 50% of the total cost, so far, so on. They understand that the possibly key demand in the future, more than training, is inference. Yeah, this is the business demand. Is shifting a little bit from a lot of training to 50 to 50, roughly speaking. If you, or at least 60% inference, 40% new training. Yeah, because training is becoming less demand, they're more efficient algorithm for training and things like that. Remember also the advancement I was talking before. Therefore, inference, in my judgment, is what NVIDIA consider as the new driver of the business. Hence, they did two things. They spent significant money to acquire Grok, which is an pure inference provider, and they designed a chip specialized for being very, very efficient in inference. To me, it seems clear the NVIDIA thinks that for them, the business, more than having training, yes, it's still training, but the future is more in inference than in training, or getting very, very efficient in inference. Yeah. Hence, you can justify a very expensive, in my judgment, acquisition of Grok and their play on designing a chip for the racks, for the cluster, CPX, specialized for disaggregating phase of inference. Now, again, as I was possibly say before, there are other specialized model, specialized startup for specialized model, like only for startup only, only for transformer architecture only, like etched, cost-efficient design, D-matrix, Rebellion, positron. Full disclosure, by the way, I work as an AI advisor for Wahed Saudi Aramco, which is a VC fund of 100 million. I'm just advisor there. Rebellion is one of their investment, just to clarify on that. But these few lines is just to say there are different approaches to design GPU or AI chips, and One is transformer model, like catch-it only, cost-efficient design of various types, the max rebellion position, just focusing on the rack architecture. So basically, how you efficiently put together the GPUs themselves, like Matter, fine-tuning or inference, so, like Sambanova, Furious AI, Untethered, or new chips, completely new chip design like Tenstor, Graphcore, or Cerberus. Okay. Now, the last part I want to mention on that is, as I say, you see in other slides, I mentioned that both robotics is both rising investment and in research. There are a lot of indications it's very, very possible now. Okay. And at the moment, you will see that Nvidia as a platform, again, you remember, right? For the AI GPU, it was not just the Nvidia chip, but there's also Nvidia CUDA. There is the software that allow easy training or easy usage of the GPU. Yeah. Same thing for robotic. They have chips specialized in robotics, and they have a platform called Jetson. Yeah. It's today is the industry standard in performance. Yeah. Although there are other options like the Qualcomm RB5, MD Crea, Raspberry is, if you know, Raspberry is very cheap hardware plus a platform called Helio. Again, as I say, Jetson wasn't the platform. Sorry, Jetson is the it's called platform, but it's the hardware. Yeah. Even on top of the platform, the equivalent of CUDA for the hardware that is Jetson is ESAC, which again allow people to train robots easily if they're using Nvidia Jetson hardware. Yeah. Now, with that, what the prediction could be? Well, first of all, I just wanted to remind you, highlighted in bold, that what we see the last year is roughly the same. What I mean by that, for Nvidia competitor, Nvidia will still be a dominant player unless incredible circumstances. However, the market shares, especially in data center, cluster, things like that, will erode below 85%. There are indication already that new player may want to diversify from Nvidia, just purely for diversify from Nvidia. That also, as you can read, that's also was one of the reasons why we started to buy Google TPUs, for examples, AIMD. Therefore, it's still very, very dominant at 85%, I would say, but will start to erode a little bit. That's at least my prediction. At the same time, I not be surprised. In fact, it's a prediction that Nvidia will start to feel the hit of their eroding position in the market, although we're very, very dominant. Therefore, they will understand that the fact that the people take the CUDA software and will try to port it, they try to basically change a little bit and make it usable for other chips. Nvidia, remember what I say here, right? There are already open source kind of software, Musa and Zluda. There are others, by the way. If you look, there are other names that you see, Zluda, CUDA, they kind of resemble even the name of CUDA, that allow to use other chip, AMD, easily. That will create that's a prediction, a lawsuit from Nvidia. They will lawsuit for plagiarism, for example. Whoever is the developer, whoever is using something that is possibly based on CUDA, to desist to use that, and creating problem on the usability of the other chips. Yeah. So this, in my judgment, is a result because they start to feel the hit. And the only reason to slow down the other is to disallow as much as possible the user their software into other chips. Yeah. In software, lawsuit is a bit difficult. I don't want to enter on that. But hey, if other company use, even if it's open source portable software, which is basically somehow inspired, let's put it that way, by CUDA, it's called Zluda or Bluda, whatever it is, there is a potential lawsuit. I predicting Nvidia will definitely start at least a lawsuit for these reasons. Again, I'm predicting this time again, but for discrete GPU. Last year I predicted, I think I predicted for cluster or large orders. No, now I'm predicting. Well, by the way, large orders is kind of the same, because if I predicted Nvidia will dominate but below 85%, automatically I'm saying the AMD or other will be 15%. Realistically, the major share for large cluster data center will below Nvidia will be AMD anyway. So it's kind of included in the first prediction. But for discrete GPU market, AMD, I believe, will have 10% of the market share. Yeah, there are various reasons for that. The main one reason is even today, AMD has a very good position in the GPU. In the discrete GPU market, and I no reason to understand why they will continue with that, especially with the new development. Especially in the new development, and the fact that now local GPU can do something with AI, right? Portable. Now, again, small model are capable enough. That means that local hardware can play. Open source software, SLUDA, etc., can play a part with that. And guess what? Yes, Nvidia can sue corporation, but a small company, they probably would never even know if they're using a SLUDA software on top of a discrete desktop GPU. It's very difficult for them to even know they are doing that. So yeah, I think AMD has a very good position for discrete GPUs. IPO of new chip maker of 1 billion. Again, it's very, as you probably get already inferred, it's very expensive to develop foundation model for sure, but definitely AI hardware. And one of the way to keep raising money is definitely doing an IPO. So I'll not be surprised that one of the private company in the space to raise quickly more money, and especially now that it's well, if there is an indication that, let's put it another way, as I say, as a prediction, there is, I say that Nvidia dominance start to be eroded. This mentality of the erosion can bring people to even in the consumer, as in consumer, I mean consumer of stocks, yeah, that it's possible to invest in other chip makers that can compete to Nvidia. Hence, it makes sense to do an IPO, because people who know that Nvidia, yes, is still dominant, but there is space for others. At the moment, even today, that's why it's a prediction. It's not clear there is space for others. Therefore, an IPO is. But the moment it's clear there is space for other players, it makes more sense to spread the world also with an IPO raising more money, because people will more inclined to believe that a new player can play against Nvidia. First 1 billion order for non-AMD. Again, this is I raising the stake of what I said last year. I think last year, if you remember my prediction and the review of the prediction this year, which was right, I say there will be a 500 million order. This year, I predict 1 billion order for non-AMD Nvidia chip. It's quite a high bar, I would say, but hey, that's what I said. I'm not taking it back. I already wrote that. So not even AMD, by the way. It's a chip that is none from these two play, which basically means another confirmation that Nvidia position further eroded if you have an order like that. As local models are now performant enough, this GPU market will want more than 6 to 6.5% currently expected. So if you look at purely GPU discrete GPU market. Yeah, you will see I cite two sources: Market Research Future and Data Intello. They will show that the discrete GPU market is going between 6.5%. Yeah. Again, I'm not going to repeat too much, but again, I said that there is a localization of model, local model are performance and so far, so on. Therefore, I'm expecting that there will be a increase in the market growth for, especially for discrete GPU, because now discrete GPU can actually do AI, can do both inference and training of things like that. And this number of growth will be larger. No, no, how much larger, but I'm expecting to see research that they will they put up these growth numbers. As the next AI chip maker growth will be due to as the next AI chip market growth will be due to expected new robotics, there will be at least one player that announces a platform for competitive performance with Nvidia Jetson. As I said before, so the robotic market is maturing. There is researchers supporting them, so far, so on, and again, Jetson, who is the software partner in Isaac, is the dominant player today, but I am expecting that at least another player will announce a new player, so not the one I mentioned here, yeah, Qualcomm, Raspberry, AMD Clear, or maybe is the same D, but will announce a much better version that will, to me, will be still in the prediction, that can compete for Nvidia Jetson. At the moment, none of the platforms I mentioned are performing against that. It can still be Nvidia, just to clarify. I'm not saying there is a different name. I'm saying that there will be, as in, for example, as AMD MI 450 now is performant compared to the new Rubin. There will be another player, it could be AMD, that will be performant of Jetson. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. It just purely because the market is now clear that it's going to happen. The robotic market is going to happen. And it makes sense for a company to invest, to produce a platform to support the industry. All right. Okay. So, high adoption and governance in defense. And we are about, so just to give an overview of timing, we are about, I'm supposed to finish in 30 minutes, half an hour. I'm surprised my voice is still lasting and talking about a few hours now. But hey, it is what it is. Let's move on. So, high adoption in governance, defense, cybersecurity event. Well, just to give few numbers for those of you that know already, I think I gave you the same number even last year. In fact, last year was lower, now it's higher. So the US is the most internet dependent country. We know now our outage will cost 300 million. Yeah. And China is the second, 240 million, and UK 93 million. Yeah. Good news, though. Sorry, I remember wrongly. It's actually the opposite. Apologies for that. In 2024, actually, 1 hour outage of internet in US was costing 450 million. So that means we are kind of improving cyber, I would say, or at least the perception is that. Attacks are increasing in 2025. That's not really a surprise, really. If there is anything you probably heard from me in the last 2-3 years, I always said, I keep saying, at least in the last 2-3 years, that while in AI you definitely spend money, in cyber you definitely make money. The reason is the moment you invest on AI, for sure you're adding vulnerabilities. Yeah, whatever the vulnerability, you're definitely adding that. Yeah, and you, even if it's just an API from Anthropic or OpenAI, yeah, that point of API connection is a new vulnerability in your system. And guess what? It needs to be protected. And guess what? There's a new risk in cybersecurity. And the moment you protect, you spend more in cybersecurity. So for sure, you're not even starting to realize any return on investment or your new OpenAI API. You're not even starting to have the result. You're already started to spend in cyber to secure that. Yeah. So in AI, you definitely start to spend money. Cybersecurity, the company make immediate money. Definitely. Yeah. So if there is anything that benefit AI, is there any other industry that benefit from AI? That is cybersecurity. The real winner of AI industry is not AI per se, it's cybersecurity, because this is the only industry that no matter what you're gonna do or you're gonna spend, is increasing the vulnerability and you increasing the spending in cybersecurity. This is the real winner, cybersecurity. Uh, not surprised in 2025, you can read the number yourself, but just because we are here, Cloudflare records denial distribution of service 30% of attack in the second half of 2024 compared to the previous year. Ransomware attack plus 42%, and manufacturing is the sector hit the most, was it the most. But there is a good thing, because in a way we are learning. What it means is that although there were more attack, there were more people didn't pay for ransomware compared to last year. Yeah, phishing is rising 41% compared to previous year. And by the way, mail phishing with AI now is 80%. Basically, whoever does mail phishing does use AI. Uh, as as you probably know already, but just to clarify on that, the first adopter of any new technology, so including AI, are usually criminals or the adult industry. So not surprised that phishing the email is now 80%. Everyone using it. China and US have the largest amount of vulnerable open devices. Depending on the report that you read, etc., they call amplifiers, which basically means they are server or devices that can be controlled for distributed denial of service. So they attack IP address, whatever, for various sources. They have the most vulnerable, easily accessible devices. Interestingly enough, the third country to have more of these devices is Italy, and the fourth is South Korea. Yeah. So you can expect that whenever there is significant DDoS, denial distribution or service attack, given these numbers, if it's not China or USA, they come to the other two, right? That's the way it is. Bots are 51% of traffic and 20% of social media. Now, yes, there are many social media that try to reduce that. I read a lot of report, believe me. I put this number at Buzz Radio report. There are reports that say even 80%, which is a bit too much to me. Certain sources, they say 12, so I settled with 20. CAV, connected autonomous vehicle, but self-driving cars is obviously one of the Waymo taxi, robot taxi, or things like that, yeah? Are increasing more vulnerabilities. Various sources on that, but I put a link on that. Their supply chains discover vulnerability in 2034, yet to materialize into incident. So basically, if you remember last year, I predicted it was very, very possible to have a bad incident related to autonomous vehicle surviving car. There are many that kind of infer the same anyway, and yet it's kind of confirmed what I say. Everyone is expecting that, but yet there are no incidents. But the vulnerability are there. That's a problem. Cybersecurity market growth is between 9 to 14% compared to last year, 7 to. Basically, there is an acceleration of growth using the same sources of research. Yeah, so you compare Murder report of last year with Murder report of the year even before, and you will see an increase of market growth estimate from that. Accident there is an AI accident database are increasing. As you can see in the number, 300, more than 300 compared to 274 in 25. More important than that, there are many allegedly, use this word, allegedly Chinese groups via cloud code, so via API, perform espionage with 10-20% supervision. Basically, it was almost automatic, and they perform espionage by usage of sophisticated model like cloud code. But there are similar for OpenAI, if I remember correctly. There is something similar. Basically, there are, don't remember if it was so China or something else, but the fact is, malicious player, allegedly for China, but could be other countries, to be honest. They are using via API, though. Again, it's not local yet, no local model yet. They are using via API to perform espionage in various different ways. You can read the report; it's quite interesting. And the last, or not least, at least to this slide, is there are new malwares, and now, as you can see, the name, fruit shell, prompt flux, prompt lock, prompt steal, quite vault. And they are able to connect the server, execute malicious script, collect sensitive data, exfiltrate credential, you name it. And there are others more, but the key element of this is not the fact that they do this malicious stuff. Even previous malwares, current inactivity do the same. The key here is they can regenerate themselves, to avoid detection. Basically, a malware detection today will try to catch the binary or the source code or that. If the source code keep regenerating itself, it changing in size, it changes itself. So it's way more difficult to detect itself, Yeah. That's the key difference here. Since Gen AI can regenerate itself, and regenerating means the detection tool every hours, I think is regenerating every hour most of this, or at least the way they've been set up. That means they are much more difficult to detect because the software, the detection software has no reference. Every time is different. Every hour is different. That's a significant. And again, most of these so far they're using via API. The next level, I say that in many different posts since last year. Unfortunately, since the model becomes smaller, one day we'll have very soon a capable model of 500 megabyte or even 50 megabyte, and that self-regenerating itself. And that will become a new era probably for cybersecurity, but this is not a prediction for this year. Deepfakes, as you can imagine, they are improving. Again, as I said last year, there will be few attempts for deepfake detection, things like that. As this year, I don't feel anyone is talking about that because it was clear, as correctly predicted last year, there is no way this will be effective way to stop deepfakes detection. Unfortunately, the AI generation is too good, so deepfake detection don't work too well. Detection tools don't work too well. Video count for 60%. There is a huge increase in what is called vishing, which is voice impersonation, surge more than 400%. Yeah. And most people, rightfully so, I will add on that most people, but also most software still struggle with this. We struggle to detect deepfake text or images compared to video. Video is still very possible to identify as fake. There are various reasons for that. I'm not going to talk on that, but if I have it's not a prediction, just a way to say that I would say video is still safe or very easy to detect in terms of deepfakes for at least a few other years. You need to be way more percent than what we have now to not understand is the video is deepfaked. It's much easier to do the rest. It will continue to do so for the next few years. That's what I say. AI can hack blockchains. Yeah. So you may hear the people are possibly worried about crypto or hence Bitcoin act or corrupted by quantum computing attack, things like that. Well, guess what? There are already ways in which you can find vulnerabilities within the blockchain. No, not with quantum, just using AI. And imagine when I say before, when you combine AI and quantum. Just to say that, AI safety score for major player. Now, the Future Online Institute every year, I believe, does a report assess the safety of major players in AI. Yeah, the best obviously A. Nobody get A. The best is actually Anthropic with C plus. All the rest is worse than that. F. The worst are Chinese players. They get a straight F. Now, it's fair to say you may have a bias with them, but hey, from my personal experience, all I can say is I can see a lot how would I say, a more focus on security in Anthropic than other players. I definitely can see that. Although if you read recent